Welcome, everyone. This is your friend, the DN What If, here with another exciting fanfiction. Today, we're diving into the story of what if Deku woke up in another world with blood on his hands? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe for more fanfiction content just like this. Now, let's get started with the fanfic. War never changes. This was a message passed on from the elders of our clan from generation to generation. A warning of the danger humanity posed to itself, and a reminder of what it cost us in ages past. They say that youth is wasted on the young, and that we should pay attention to the wisdom of our elders. I couldn't have cared less. And who could blame me? I was young and wild, barely past my 6th year. My days were carefree and spent playing games with the other children. After all, responsibilities were for the adults, and what would a child know of war? Leave the learning and duties to the older children, let us enjoy our childhood. But none of that mattered after the day the Legion came for us. The day I learned what kind of cruelty the world was capable of, and the day I lost everything. But this story isn't about that. There'll be plenty of time to go over that later. No, this story is about how I came to be in a world of heroes and villains, and a story about an unlikely pair of siblings brought together by fate. My name is Dustin Cross, and this is the story of how my sister and I became the world's greatest heroes. Footsteps echoed loudly through the dark, lonely halls of the Lucky 38 Casino. The casino that had been closed off to the world for hundreds of years had suddenly found itself bustling with activity following the Battle of Hoover Dam, and yet there always seemed to be a sense of sadness inside. The feeling of loneliness weighed heavily on the figure walking through its halls, and he stood a moment to gather his thoughts. Young and serious, the young man stood at an impressive height over 6 feet tall, and his broad shoulders added to the imposing figure he cut. His face was tanned and handsome beyond what most in the Wastes had ever seen, but seemed almost inhuman, as if he had been purposefully sculpted to be perfect. Faint scars covered his otherwise perfect face, most notably the jagged scar covering his right eye. His right arm, while appearing flesh and blood, had long since been replaced by a cybernetic one after he had lost it in a gruesome battle. But what stood out about him the most were his bright red eyes and pure white hair, adding to his unnatural appearance. He was known throughout the Wastes by a number of names, but most knew him by the title of the job he once carried, Courier 6. Only the people closest to him knew him by his real name, Dustin Cross, and it was a group of these individuals who waited behind the door Dustin stood in front of. Drawing his breath, Dustin pushed his way into the room. Tacky red carpet covered the whole room, and a huge window replaced the wall at the back of the room. Taking up most of the space was a large, round table, and crowding around it were a number of local leaders and members of the newly established Mojave Alliance. Chatter died down quickly as his friends and advisors turned to watch him as he moved towards his seat at the head of the table. Throwing himself into the arms of the huge red chair at the top end of the massive table, he quickly swiveled to face the others. Before we begin, are there any pressing matters that need to be brought to the floor? Dustin asked wearily, looking around the room. A loud, unruly voice was the first to respond. Yeah, I've got something. What kind of idiot has me rolled out of bed at 5 in the morning for a meeting? You're lucky your errand boy didn't get a bullet in his pecker for that. Cut the crap, Cass, I'm sure Dustin's got his reasons. Came the low voice of a tall, tired-looking man wearing a beret. Reason or not, Boone, he's looking for 'n but hoopin' if he tries this sheet on me again. He's lucky I even showed up. Turning his chair in her direction, Dustin looked Cass over, whose bloodshot eyes indicated she had been celebrating again the night before. Cass, I promise I wouldn't have asked you all here if it wasn't important, so please give me just a few minutes of your time. Dustin pleaded. Fine, but it better be good or you're gonna have to figure out how to pull a boot from your butt. She growled, sinking back into the soft cushions of her chair, fishing a half-empty bottle of booze out of the pack at her waist. Clearing his throat, Dustin stood from his seat. Reports from our scientists at Big Mountain have come back with some information they found concerning. The others shifted in their seats uneasily at the mention of the facility. If the crazy scientists there were worried, things must have truly gone bad. While performing a normal energy scan of the area surrounding the Mojave, They detected an enormous surge of energy coming from just beyond our borders. In what was once Legion territory. They can't say for certain what is causing it, but they know it's dangerous. If it's not taken care of, it could have catastrophic consequences for us all. Confused and concerned murmurs came from around the room. Finally, a young woman dressed in plain brown robes stood up. "All right, you've got our attention, but what does any of this mean? And what does it have to do with any of us? Couldn't we just send a team out to figure out what it is?" "If only it were so easy, Veronica. We can't afford to start another war, especially not now. We have to know what's happening, and if the Legion is somehow involved. One of us needs to go and find it," silently. He paused. "For that reason, I'm stepping down from command of the Mojave." The sentence had barely left his mouth before Dustin was bombarded with shouts and cries from the whole room. "What do you mean step down dash? You can't just leave when we're right in the middle of negotiations dash. How could you be so stuck dash?" Their voices rose in pitch until finally the whole room was shouting. Unable to make sense of what was being said, Dustin finally slammed his fist on the table. "Enough!" Dustin roared, his head already pounding from his late night of planning. "Enough, please. I will answer your questions, but one at a time. Please." Slowly, Veronica sat back down. She sat silently before looking up into Dustin's eyes. "I think the biggest question we all must have is this: why are you stepping down? Wasn't this alliance all your idea?" Chuckling humorlessly, Dustin shook his head. "None of this was for me. You should have known that by now. I was never going to stay here for long. Ruling a nation, no matter how small, was never in the plan. The NCR wouldn't take me seriously anyway. I mean, look at me, I'm barely 17. Do you really think they'd respect our claim if I was in charge? The senators would be practically drooling at the thought of such easy pickings, even after the shitshow they've been through here. They'd be back within a week with another army at their backs if they sensed any kind of weakness." Turning away from the group, Dustin walked over to the window looking out over New Vegas. "Despite what the NCR thinks, I didn't want any of this. Power doesn't mean shit to me, and it's not like I have a future here anyway. All I am, all I've ever been, is a weapon. A killer. A monster." His voice flat. Facing back to the group, he continued. "It's all I'll ever be, and nothing can change that now. All that matters now is that you all and the people of this nation are safe from the Legion and the NCR. That's why we built the Alliance, and why I instructed Yes Man to follow the command of this council. From now on, it's up to you all to make decisions. And to make sure we don't make the same mistakes the NCR did, we'll have to set up some new rules. First, to prevent any conflicts between communities and the central government, each year an arbiter will be selected by Yes Man to settle disputes. Second, each community will have a leader that's chosen by the citizens. Each community will be allowed one vote, no matter the population size. Each community will make their own laws as they see fit, as long as they do not violate the laws we have already established as part of our central doctrine. And finally, I have a proposal for each of you." The room remained quiet, the implications of the last few minutes leaving the members speechless. The silence was unsettling, and Dustin's calm demeanor confused them. He'd always been hard to read at the best of times, but now it was impossible to determine his thoughts. Taking their silence for acceptance, Dustin continued. "First of all, Boone, I would like you to take command of the military and militia for each town under the Alliance. The Securitrons will remain under control of Yes Man, but you need more than just an army of robots to protect this nation. I can't think of someone I trust more than you for this position." Though taken aback, Boone quickly composed himself, keeping his face cold and expressionless. "If that's what you want, I'll do what I can to keep this place safe. For Carla." Nodding his acceptance, Dustin moved on to his next companion. "Veronica, I would like you to be in charge of a special operations group. Now that we've brought the Brotherhood of Steel into the fold, we need a team to go out and search for old world tech. If this alliance is going to survive, you'll need everything you can find. I figured members of the Brotherhood would be best at that, but you're the only one of them I can trust completely to make sure it will be put to use for the greater good." Almost squealing in delight, Veronica jumped out of her seat. For the first time in years, she felt like her dream to make the Brotherhood change their ways finally had a chance. I won't let you down. Dustin continued on to the bored-looking man seated next to her. Arcade, you're one of the smartest people I've ever met, so I believe you would be perfect as the head of technological research and development. Arcade sat in silence for a moment. Finally, he reached up to adjust his glasses. His face remained bored and compliant, but his voice betrayed his anger. You know this is crazy, right? After everything that's happened, how are we all supposed to just go along with this? How can you just trust us with all of this responsibility and information at once and then leave our lives forever? Are we worth so little to you? Sighing, Dustin slowly lowered himself back into his chair. Arcade, I can't be the leader you want. He stated bluntly. I've tried to be a better person, but the only thing I'm good at is killing. The people need more than I can ever give them. Arcade sat back in surprise. He opened his mouth to shout back his argument, preparing himself mentally for a long moral debate, but he was cut off by his friend. I am personally responsible for the death of thousands of people, Arcade. Men, women, children have all died by my hand, both on purpose and on accident. The leader of a brand new nation cannot be one who has his hands stained in the blood of so many people. It wouldn't be right. Arcade quietly closed his mouth, the words sinking into his brain. Wordlessly he nodded his head, silently agreeing to his friend's request. We would have followed you to the end, you know that, right? He asked quietly. I know, and that's why I have to leave. You all have a future here, but I never will. He replied sadly. As Dustin composed himself, Cass perked her head up, the excitement of the meeting drowning out most of the headache she had from her hangover. Dustin raised his eyebrow, looking her over with a critical eye. The fiery redhead was sloppy, and she was famous for a nasty temper and a tendency to drink herself to near death. Despite that, he knew she had a knack for trade, was immensely loyal to anyone she cared for, and though he hated to admit it, she had made his miserable life more fun than he'd ever imagined. Despite some of his concerns about her character, he knew she would be the best person for the job. Cass, I'd like you to be in charge of trade for the Alliance. Caravans, money management, you name it. You have more experience than anyone here and I know you'll do great. For the first time in a long time, Cass found herself unable to say anything. After a moment of silence, she finally let out a joyful whoop. Well, it's about damn time someone recognized my skills. You bet you're sweet, but I'll take the job. Cassidy Caravans is back in business, baby. As she spoke, she ran over and wrapped her arm around Dustin's shoulder, nearly dragging him out of his chair. After finally escaping the death grip Cass had on him, he turned to his last two companions, gasping for air. Raoul, Lily, I'm sorry, but I don't have anything for you two besides my thanks. Raoul, I know that nothing can hold you back from becoming a hero to the Wastes. Show them what an old fart like you can do. And Lily, thank you for the support you've given me in these last few months. It's meant more than you can imagine. Rolling his eyes, the old ghoul leaned back in his chair. I dunno, boss. Maybe I'll go start up a retirement home, go put myself away so these young folks won't get upset that an old man shows them up. Chuckling quietly, Dustin turned to leave. Before he reached the door, he suddenly found himself in the crushing arms of the massive Nightkin Lily. Oh, Grandma's gonna miss her little pumpkin. You have to promise to write to me every day now, okay, dearie? Or Leo's gonna be upset with you. It's a good thing I kept that fake spine Big Mountain gave me. Dustin thought to himself as he felt her arms tighten. Quickly promising the weeping giant he would write as much as he could, he took one last look around the room. Though he had a final sinking feeling in his stomach that this would be the last time he'd see any of them, he finally forced himself to turn away. After all, it was better for all of them if he wasn't a part of their lives any longer. It would be less painful for them in the end. There was no greater feeling in Dustin's opinion than being out on the open road again. The freedom, the energy that rushed through him was like a drag. The happy beeping that came from his shoulder indicated his final companion agreed. He, the ever-loyal little Eyebot, was happily beeping a tune as he flew and danced around the air. Sighing at his companion's antics, Dustin took a quick glance at his surroundings. Even though the Mojave was significantly safer now that they'd cleared out most of the raider camps, small pockets of the New Vegas ruins still hid their remnants. Pulling up his Pip-Boy, he readied a few weapons for himself. He was immensely proud of the device on his wrist. What had once been little more than a fancy wristwatch had been upgraded by Dustin significantly. By taking apart a few of the vending machines in the Sierra Madre casino, he'd found an amazing way to quickly get access to his weapons. Using the machine's core and a high-powered fusion battery, he could digitalize and summon any of the items in the inventory of his Pip-Boy at the click of a button. Even better, by linking the system to his cybernetic arm, he could summon his favorite weapons mid-battle to confuse his enemies. A flick of his wrist and a power fist would suddenly digitalize into a submachine gun. The advantage he gained from his unpredictability had saved his life many times over, and it allowed him to react quicker in case of an ambush, such as the one he had just walked himself into. Breaking him out of his thoughts, a fiend jumped out of a ruined building to his left, screaming a war cry as he leveled his plasma rifle at his chest. Cursing at himself, Dustin summoned his favorite weapon. In a bright flash of blue light, a spear suddenly appeared in his hand, throwing off the fiend's aim, allowing Dustin to dodge. Charging the distracted raider with near superhuman speed, Dustin quickly closed the space. Swinging the spear in a deadly arc desperately, the fiend raised the rifle to deflect it, hoping it could buy him an extra second. The spear, however, had been forged in Big Mountain out of a mix of some of the most powerful metals on the planet. It was near indestructible, and the Saturnite alloy in the diamond-shaped head ensured that the spear was razor-sharp. A good swing could cut a steel door in half. The fiend didn't stand a chance. Quickly turning away from the now headless body, Dustin spotted another two fiends charging him. As one leveled a laser RCW at him, an energy blast suddenly caved the side of her face in. A small beep from behind him was all Dustin needed to know. As he charged the last fiend who was desperately trying to unjam the cowboy repeater, the held E laid down a barrage of covering fire, forcing the fiend to jump around to avoid getting hit. Looking down for a moment to clear out the jam, the fiend gave a triumphant shout as he brought the gun to level with his shoulder. As he looked back up, a sharp pain starting at his shoulder suddenly hit him, and his world went dark. As the fiend's upper torso slumped and fell off of his lower half, Dustin heard a voice shouting at him. One final fiend had emerged from the shadows, standing at nearly 6.5 feet tall. The giant man's eyes were wild, and a wide grin was plastered on his face. A rush of adrenaline flew through Dustin, and he raised his spear in challenge, a dark smile slowly spreading on his face. Grinning even more crazily, the fiend reached back to grab his weapon. He slowly drew back his hand to ready himself, before brandishing his weapon proudly. As Dustin readied himself, he realized that in the enormous raider's hands was a pool cue. Silence greeted the fiend as he sprinted from the ruins at the lone figure, shouting and gibbering incoherently. Disgust was all Dustin could feel as he pulled out his favorite revolver, Lucky, and aimed at the raider, putting a single bullet straight into his brain. Feeling like he'd been somehow cheated, Dustin stomped away, muttering curses to himself as Edie quietly followed behind him. Though he'd become accustomed to the layout of the deserts surrounding New Vegas, the trip to the edge of the border still took the better part of a week. Food and water would quickly become a problem out here, and Dustin knew that if he was to survive, he would need to conserve them both. Reaching out to touch his robot companion, he took one last look back at the place that had been his home for nearly a year, his thoughts turning melancholy. "Why do I keep getting this feeling I won't be coming back, my friend?" he asked sadly. A series of beeps and chirps answered him. "You get those filthy words out of your mouth, Eddie. You know there's no such thing as fate. I should wash your circuit board out with soap." He snarked at the little robot, lightly pushing him away. Another series of beeps came from Edie. "Okay, I'm really going to wash your circuit board out with soap now. Where'd you even learn those words?" One beep responded. "Cassidy? Why am I not surprised?" Shaking his head, Dustin took one final look at the city in the distance. "I guess we might as well get going, buddy. No use wasting any more time with sentiment." As he and Edie trudged on, the sun slowly started to set on the Mojave, casting their shadows as they quietly trekked through the dust and sand of the desert. It took another week of hard traveling before Dustin got the alert on his Pip-Boy that they were close. The open, empty terrain had slowly been replaced by towering boulders and crumbling cliff walls, perfect for an ambush. This area was deserted, but it was still owned by the Legion, and Dustin had a lifetime of experience with them already to take any chances. Quietly crouching down, he slowly walked along the cliff wall, keeping low and out of sight, close behind. No sound could be heard except the occasional rock falling from the cliffs around him. After what felt like hours of crouching, an opening in the cliff walls came into view. Creeping up the small incline, Dustin peeked his head over the top, looking down into the clearing below. Nothing could have prepared him for what he saw. The clearing was small, not much wider than 30 feet across. 2 other entrances sat opposite him, and the high walls of the caverns were stained red. What caught Dustin's eyes the quickest, though, was a massive blue ball of energy, hovering in the air just above the ground in the dead center of the clearing. A small hum of noise filled the area, and he could almost taste the iron in the air. There seemed to be something strange about the ball, as if it were alive, calling to him, and Dustin found himself stepping towards it without thinking. As he stepped closer, he noticed strange rocks that grew larger the closer to the ball they were. The ones at the edge next to where he stood were barely at his ankles, but the ones closest to the ball were nearly as tall as he was. Stepping slowly around the rocks, he inched his way closer to the ball, and whispers in a strange language seemed to come from it, growing louder as he approached. A small worried beep came from behind him, and Dustin could feel Ada's form shaking just behind his head. Turning his head to give the robot some support, Dustin felt his foot catch on one of the rocks and he suddenly found himself falling. Quickly twisting his body to land on his shoulder, Dustin gave a small grunt of pain as he felt it connect with one of the sharp rocks on the ground. Grumbling as he pulled himself up, he looked back at what he fell over. His blood turned to ice. It was a hand. The rock he had tripped over was distinctly shaped like a hand reaching out towards the blue light. Looking around, he finally took in his surroundings, understanding why Edie had been so nervous. Every single rock in the clearing was disturbingly human. The rocks at the edge of the clearing all looked like hands, reaching out to the center of the clearing. As they got closer, they were replaced by bodies, clawing their way out of the dirt, until finally full-sized people were at the center. The faces of the rocks were not detailed, but the muddy expressions in the rock were a mix of horror and adoration. A sudden emotion he hadn't felt in years started to well up in his body, and Dustin felt his heart start to race. Panic was a feeling he hated, and he tried to crush it down before his body finally took over. Scrambling backwards, Dustin ran towards the entrance, but before his eyes, the walls slid shut. His breath now coming in short gasps, he spun around hoping to find the other entrances, but they too were sliding shut. Trapped in the clearing, Dustin felt his breath coming in shorter gasps as he finally collapsed against the wall. Fighting the panic taking over his body, sweat pouring down his face, he forced his legs to stand up. Never again, he thought to himself. I won't be weak ever again. Even if there was no one to see him, he would never let anyone call him weak again, much less his own body. Suddenly, the whispers started again. As the voices grew louder, his body started to slowly calm down. Against his own will, he crept closer to the center, and he felt a strange peace flow over him. Closer and closer he got, reaching his right arm out towards the light. He could hear Edith faintly calling out to him, beeping and whirring in fear, but the voices seemed to keep all of his attention. Mere steps away from the ball, he finally stopped. The whispers seemed to be shouts now, and he couldn't hear anything else, even with Eve flying around his head like a bloatfly. Finally, on an impulse, he moved his hand towards the light. A lance of immense pain immediately raced down his arm, and he had one final thought before blacking out. One final regret before his life would be over. Sir. Cold was a feeling Dustin was familiar with. Some might find that surprising considering he lived in a desert wasteland, but those unfamiliar with the land would never know just how cold it could get in the Mojave at night. Waking up to the cold was something he could live with, but now something was different. Everything felt wet. And that was a feeling that was disturbingly uncomfortable to him. Dustin's eyes flew open, suddenly aware of the wrongness of the feeling. Rain in the Mojave was non-existent, and the rivers running to Lake Mead were the only source of water for miles, which made his current predicament even more concerning. Sitting up, Dustin took a moment to look at his surroundings. His eyes slowly cleared, and the shapes around him began to come into focus. He sat there for a moment, jaw dropped in disbelief, staring at the sight before him. Is that a fing tree? He thought, completely dumbfounded. Am I sitting in a grass? What the hell, where the F am I? What is going on? As he sat there for a moment, he tried to make sense of his situation. He hadn't seen an actual living tree since traveling to Jacobstown, and the only place where he'd ever seen grass before was in the living hellhole that was Vault. The Mojave was a dry, barren place, and could never support the environment he found himself in. There was only one explanation for this craziness: Klein. Getting to his feet, Dustin looked around for a camera, expecting the usual patronizing voice of his lead scientist to start booming around him at any second. All right, Klein, you got me, ha ha ha. Take me the F back now. Silence answered him. Dustin felt his temper rising quickly. Klein, this isn't funny anymore. I know it's you, so pull the plug already. More silence. Fine. But you'd better remember I gave you a chance when I'm locking you in a room with all of Dalla's pornography tapes playing on repeat for a week. Grumbling, Dustin walked around a few feet, getting feeling back into his legs. Everything felt strange to him, as if the whole world was bigger somehow. Looking around, he spotted the still form of Ed a few feet away. Though the robot also appeared much bigger than normal, Dustin pushed the thought away upon seeing the condition he was in. His hull was smoking and the occasional spark flew from his vent compartments. Oh no, you can't do this to me again, you can't be gone again. Dustin collapsed to his knees next to his oldest friend. He had been his first companion in the Mojave, all the way back in Prim. Everything that he had been through, from the ghouls at Novak, to Hoover Dam, and all the way to the end of the divide, he had been there. He couldn't lose him now. He wouldn't. He'd fixed him up once before, he could do it again. It's all right, buddy, I'll make this right. You'll be fixed in no time. I've just got to get you somewhere safe for now, then you'll be just fine. Standing up to his full height, Dustin bent down to pick the bot up, only to realize he'd missed one important detail in his worry for his friend. As he tried to lift the robot, he found he no longer had the strength to lift it. What he could normally do with one arm was now impossible to do with both. Slowly backing away, Dustin looked down at his hands. Everything suddenly seemed wrong to him. The Pip-Boy, normally so snugly fit around his wrist, now hung loosely at the base of his hand. His spear, sitting close to where he'd awoken, was now almost twice his length and barely fit into his hands. Strangely though, his clothes all fit him perfectly. Shock ran through his system as his brain scrambled to find a reasonable explanation for what was happening. Had he somehow been shrunk as well? Finally, he spotted a small pond at the edge of the grass patch he stood in. Running to the water, Dustin took in his reflection. As he gazed at the reflection in the water, every thought in his head shut down. Instead of the fierce young man he was used to seeing, a young boy stared back at him. For the second time that day, panic started to well up inside him. Fighting his nerves with every fiber of his being, Dustin once again forced himself to calm down. Panicking would solve nothing, and he was no weakling. Figuratively speaking, there's gotta be some reason for this. Probably just a simulation or something, right? I'm sure Klein or one of the others could have easily come up with this. There's plenty they've already done. Dustin's thoughts grew more intense, trying to make sense of this new development. First, I've got to figure out how to get out of here. As soon as I'm out, I can start coming up with ways to make Klein and the others regret pulling this sheet on me. Nodding contentedly to himself, Dustin gathered up his things. Edie was quickly digitalized into his Pip-Boy, which still hung limply on his wrist. Looking at it in disgust, Dustin slid it up to his bicep, which was barely big enough to keep it in place with a string of rope tied around its base. As he slowly trudged through the wet grass, Dustin entertained himself by thinking of all the ways he was going to get back at his tormentors. The image of Klein's brain jar being shoved up the back end of a Brahmin was happily playing in his mind as he trekked through the lightly wooded area. Faintly, he began to hear noise coming from all around him. Silently creeping through the underbrush, Dustin followed the sounds. As he got closer, the sounds grew louder and he found himself unable to determine any single source of the noise. Everything around him was bustling with activity, and Dustin suddenly found himself being reminded of New Vegas on Free Booze Night. As he came close to the edge of the brush, Dustin peeked out the open area. Once again, he suddenly found himself unable to speak, and his jaw once again fell open in disbelief. Standing before him was a city. An actual standing city, with no broken-down ruins or rubble. Huge buildings as tall as the sky stretched out before him. Lights were everywhere, bright shining lights of every color were on signs and billboards of every shape and size. Cars, not the hunks of crap he usually saw on the side of the road, but actual working cars drove at speeds he couldn't believe down a massive street. And all of the people. Never before in his whole life had Dustin seen so many people in one area. Even the busiest nights in New Vegas paled in comparison. Dustin's mind went into overdrive, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. Immediately thinking this was another trick, Dustin was finally determined to catch them in their deceit. If this is fake, there's only one way I can determine this for sure. They can mess with my normal senses, but I know they can't mess with my cybernetics. Not after all the work I put into making those firewalls for them. Huffing a small laugh to himself, Dustin reveled in his superior intelligence. Obviously, his subordinates at Big Mountain had been trying to mess with him and pull a prank on him, but he finally had them. Whatever their reason, he would enjoy rubbing it in their faces that he had beaten them once again. Except maybe and they weren't so bad by themselves. And Dala, if you could get around her weird human features. But he'd enjoy rubbing it in Boris and Klein's faces for sure. Dustin reached up to his right temple, close to where the scar that cut across his eye lay. Tapping it lightly twice, he energized his cybernetic eye. His vision turned blurry in his right side for a second before it came into focus with a grayish haze. Scanning his surroundings, Dustin's sense of superiority quickly turned into horror. Either his tormentors had managed to hack past his firewall, or everything before him was real. Neither option was a good one in his opinion. It isn't possible, there's no way this can be real. Dustin thought. This has to be a mistake, I must have broken it or something. With no other options, Dustin found himself with the sudden need to move. Adrenaline was rushing through him and he needed to get it out of his system to think clearly. Pushing his way out of the brush, Dustin started jogging through the crowd on the sidewalk. Confusion turned to concern, and concern to anger. As far as Dustin cared, anger was a better option than panic. As his anger grew, he felt his head start to pound. He picked up speed, anger and adrenaline fueling his energy. Now at a full run, Dustin's thoughts grew cloudy. The voices of the people that surrounded him sounded familiar, and yet the language was so foreign. He'd never heard it before and yet he felt he could almost understand it. The writing on the signs seemed to say something, and it seemed he could almost read it. The pain in his head grew and he found himself sprinting, not caring who he ran into. The voices were becoming clearer, and the writing more legible, but the pain was becoming too intense, his whole world spinning. Collapsing on the sidewalk, he paid no attention to the concerned voices over him, sitting right on the verge of understanding what they were saying. Then suddenly, a wave of pain hit him with such intensity that he wanted to scream. As he found his vocal cords straining, he realized he was screaming, uncontrollably screaming out his pain as his head felt like it was splitting open. Just as quickly as it came, the pain stopped. His voice quieted, and his breathing came in ragged gasps. He was suddenly aware of the sound of whispers around him, dozens of people surrounding him in a circle. One of them kneeled down towards him and reached out his hand. The man looked strange to him, his face appearing unnaturally stretched out and his arms twisted and turned as if they were made of rubber. "Are you okay, kid? What happened to you? Where are your parents at?" Concern filled the strange man's voice and the others around him began looking around, searching for his non-existent parents. "Don't worry, you're all right now. We'll make sure you're okay until we can track them down. You're safe now. We're here for you, there's no need to be scared." Despite his emotional turmoil, the fact he could now clearly understand the people around him was not lost on Dustin. Wherever he was, whoever had brought him here had done something to him, and there was no way he'd play into their schemes. No one controlled Dustin Cross but Dustin Cross. No person commanded his life, no God, and certainly not fate. This was not something he would stand for, and he planned to get to the bottom of it as soon as he was away from this crowd. Suddenly, Dustin heard a commotion coming from down the block. A huge bang sounded out and the people surrounding him staggered from the noise. Seizing his chance, Dustin jumped up and sprinted away from the crowd, ignoring their cries for him to stop. But stop he wouldn't. Dustin had learned long ago that kindness from a stranger was only a trap. No one in the wastes would ever offer help unless there was something in it for them, and he wasn't about to find out the price. Reaching the end of his endurance, he threw himself into an abandoned alleyway, waiting for the excitement to die down. A few more blasts rang out, and finally a huge gout of fire blasted past the alley he was in. Sirens blared around him, and they drew closer until a number of cars flew past him. Peeking out from the alleyway, Dustin looked around to find out what had happened. Cars with red flashing lights were circled around the intersection, and a huge crowd surrounded them. As he watched, Dustin got his first good chance to look at the people of this place. Many of the people on the street had strange appearances to him. Some had animal-like heads, and some seemed to be abnormally large or too small. Dustin swore he saw a man with a hammer for a head, but he chalked that up to the stress. Finally, his eyes fell upon the man at the center of the intersection, and his eyes widened. He'd seen men set on fire, and believed it was quite possibly one of the worst ways to go. But the man standing there was not only on fire, he seemed to create it. Flames danced in his hair, and fire flew freely from his hands. Even from a distance, Dustin could feel the heat radiating from him. That was all he needed to see. Turning around, Dustin retreated into the dark alleyway, desperately searching for anything that remained of his old life. He felt a trickle of fear that this was a search that would never end, before exhaustion finally overtook him and he passed out on a pile of trash. A month had passed since that fateful day. As Dustin became more acquainted with this strange land, he found himself slowly adapting to its weirdness. His life became a sort of routine. In the morning, he'd sneak around and steal some food from some of the local stores, sticking to large, bustling markets to slip into the crowd more easily. In the afternoon, he'd spend time doing reconnaissance, scouting out the area and finding any information he could get his hands on. What he'd learned so far was extensive. The place he had been unceremoniously dropped in was none other than Japan, specifically a city called Mizudafu. While he'd initially believed that he had somehow miraculously found his way halfway across the globe and that the appearances of the people here were due to acute radiation poisoning, he quickly threw that theory out. Everything was too nice and clean, with not a trace of radiation in the air. The only clear reason for this he could come up with was so completely absurd that he'd almost completely given up on it, but the memory of the man on fire gave him some pause. But there would be plenty of time later for that line of questions. The second and most important thing he'd learned about the people here was that every person had a unique ability, what they called a quirk. This ability manifested itself in so many different ways it was next to impossible to find someone who had the same ability as another. This only added to the danger and unpredictability Dustin felt in this new land. Finally, his evenings were spent rebuilding EDE, whose damage was extensive but fixable, and avoiding the gangs of teenagers and adult criminals that stalked the lower streets. Which brought Dustin to the unfortunate situation he now found himself in. Look, loser, just hand over that hunk of junk, and we won't have to show you what your insides look like. It's very simple. But the leering faces of the pimply teen and his two lackeys that stood at the end of the alley indicated that he had no intention of letting this go. Usually priding himself on his caution, Dustin cursed himself for becoming sloppy. His new body was hard to work with, he felt so physically weak and his mind seemed to wander as if he were a child again. Mixed with his lack of good food, he began to slip up. The gang of teens had been harassing him for almost a week now after finding him tinkering with ED. A few broken noses and a rather nasty blow to the ball had ended the encounter, but they came back with greater numbers the next day. After almost a week, Dustin had finally believed them to have lost the trail only to be caught again due to his own arrogance. "Hey guys, how about we just forget all of this nasty business, huh? I'm sure a bunch of handsome guys like yourselves have plenty of beautiful ladies to go after, right? Why waste time with me? Dustin said, slowly backing down the alley. He could hear two more of the teens moving around at the back of the alley in a pathetic attempt to sneak up behind him. Pretending he didn't notice them, he continued. There must be something better to do with your time than spend it out here. You know, I think I heard a couple of the other street beggars saying they'd found a stash of drags around here. Maybe you could go find them. I'm sure it'd be a better use of your time than chasing me, and it's not like you're gonna do anything better with your life anyway. Dustin winced as the last line came out before he could stop himself. The lead teen angrily stalked his way forward. You know, it's that winning attitude of yours that got you in this mess. Maybe you should learn to keep your mouth shut before someone shuts it for you permanently. His face was relatively normal looking apart from a pair of antennas sticking out of the top of it, but the extra pair of arms that stuck out of his shoulders betrayed what Dustin now knew was called a quirk. The wicked-looking sides and wings were almost exactly the same as the ones on the praying mantises that he'd fought before, and Dustin had no intention of getting involved with those in his current body. As the teens moved closer, the gang member on the right, a tall teen with the face and tail of a deer, tossed a can of beer onto the ground. You brought this on yourself, kid. If you'd have just accepted that we were in charge of the streets and given us proper tribute, you'd have gotten away with a beating, but you just had to open that fat FNG mouth of yours. Now your butt is ours. Oh come on, you guys didn't take any of that seriously, right? After all, I never even met your mother. I'm sure she's not a— What was it I said again? A broken down, used up cum-dump who was so busy effing her brothers, she couldn't see how much of a failure her son was? I think you must have me confused with Dash. No, we don't. I meant that as a compliment, you know. Deerhead paused for a split second, his eye twitching before he charged, bellowing in rage. Dustin waited as he charged, the leader shouting for him to stop before suddenly, Dustin sprang forward. Alone, the teen stood no chance, and with a quick blow to the side of the knee, followed by a heavy metal bucket swung into his head, the deer teen went down. Taking the opportunity, Dustin sprinted past the teens sneaking up behind him, and as he passed he sent the walls of trash crashing behind him. The angry screams from praying mantis indicated that he was not happy with his underling's failure. Running from these Jarkus wouldn't be easy in his new body, but he'd been in much worse positions before, and there was no way he'd be killed by a bunch of pathetic losers like them. Climbing would be his best bet. Jumping up onto a pipe running along the side of a building, he began to make his way up. Next time, please remember to keep your mouth shut, you moron. He thought to himself as he climbed higher up. It doesn't cost anything to shut up after all. But they were such jackasses, they really deserved it. He countered in his mind. After all they dash, he stopped before pulling himself onto the roof, laying on his back. Oh my god, I'm literally arguing with myself. I need to talk to a real person again, and soon. I'm starting to lose it. A crash broke Dustin out of his spiral of thoughts. The teens had finally caught up, but luckily had no clue where he'd gone. Keeping an eye on them to make sure, Dustin readied his silenced .22 rifle, Ratslayer. He'd learned killing in this place was frowned upon, but Dustin had a good hunch these guys wouldn't be missed. Before he could take aim, however, he heard a scream come from below him. Quickly turning his attention, Dustin spotted the source of the noise. A young woman and her small child had been cornered by two of the gang members in an abandoned park behind the building he was on. What they were doing there, Dustin had no clue, but he didn't like the direction this was going. For a split second, he considered using this opportunity to slip away, but one look through his scope at the fear on both of the girls' faces stopped him in his tracks. Slipping down from the roof, he scanned the small, dirty park they were standing in. Quietly making his way closer to the group, he pulled out his spear knowing he couldn't fire a shot with them so close. He slowly lowered himself down, ready to act at a moment's notice. Well, what do we have here? The gang leader crooned over the young mother, eyes wandering over her body. The mantis-like teen, Tenno, had been upset over the loss of the brat who'd evaded them, but the stupid kid had led them to a better prize. What's a beautiful young lady like yourself doing in our part of town? Don't you know how dangerous it is here? The young woman raised her face, her deep green hair falling over her tear-streaked face. Please, my daughter heard someone cry out in pain and just wanted to help. Please just let us go. We don't have anything to do with any of this. Will, I suppose we could let you go. We're not heartless after all. He said, putting his finger to his chin. Oh, thank you, sir, thank you for why dash. But I think you should repay us for our generosity. After all, we can't just let everyone who comes through our territory off free, or then no one would take us seriously. That wouldn't be fair to us, would it? He looked at his friends with a lecherous smile on his face. Their responding smiles were just as evil. The green-haired woman sniffled, clearly scared about the direction this conversation was heading. I have some money in my purse. Please, it's not much, but take it all. We don't have any need for money, but I'm sure we can come up with plenty of other options. Tenno said, moving closer to the woman. He approached her slowly, his fellow gang members standing behind the woman, ensuring she couldn't run. As he slowly walked closer, reaching down to touch the woman, he could see her trembling, and could see the fear in the eyes of the small girl in her arms. His eyes grew hungry, and he reached to grab for her arm. Just as he was about to grab her, a gurgling sigh broke him out of his trance. Spinning around, he saw one of his companions, a short teen with long razor-sharp teeth and huge blades in his arms, fall over, blood spilling out of a massive hole in his throat. Standing over his body was the child he had been chasing before, a spear in his hands. Hissing angrily, he motioned for one of the other teens, a boy with hulking arms twice the size of his body, to watch over the woman. The other teen moved to his side, activating his quirk. As he did, small pieces of glass floated around him, huge shards of the dozens of broken bottles in the area. The two stared down the child, waiting to strike. Finally tired of waiting, the second teen sent a wave of broken glass flying across the alley. Right away, Dustin knew he'd made a mistake in taking out the one with the teeth. He'd misjudged which one of the four would be most dangerous to him and was about to pay the price. As the shards of glass came flying at him, he activated the GRX implant in his body, feeling time slow down around him. Dropping down, he grabbed the body of the fallen gang member, using it as a shield from the wave of death coming at him. The body of the fallen teen was ripped to shreds, and a number of the shards embedded themselves in his arms and chest, but at the very least he was still alive. Throwing the body off of him, he quickly summoned a throwing knife, sending it flying. Although his aim was true, he hadn't accounted for the glass shards still flying around his enemies, watching it glance off of a larger bottle and embed itself in the glass thrower's shoulder instead. The glass thrower cried out in pain, the pieces falling around him as his concentration was broken. The mantis-like teen came at him, swinging his extra arms at Dustin. Pressing his small advantage, Dustin threw the spear at his opponent, trusting his aim while quickly dodging the swipe from the mantis blades. The dull thunk and cry from behind him was all he needed to know before he turned his attention to the gang's leader. The teen hissed at him, flying forward on his wings and lashing out with his blades. Rolling backwards under the deadly arms, Dustin kept dodging the heavy blows aimed at him. Finally, he activated another of his GRX implants and jumped to where his spear lay in the body of the second teen. While he had a longer reach with his spear, Dustin still lacked much of the strength needed to fight with it properly, and he could already feel himself losing blood from his wounds. He'd heal eventually due to his Phoenix implant, but it would take some time, and time was something he didn't have. Resorting to hit-and-run tactics, Dustin continued to poke at the teen, scoring hits on his arms and legs. Finally, driven by pain and anger, the teen drove down at Dustin, slashing with his blades. Ready for his desperate attack, Dustin ducked and used the teen's momentum against him as he swung the spear through the air. A sickening, squelching sound filled the air as the teen's right side was severed, leaving it wriggling on the floor. Screaming in agony, the teen flew back, eyeing him warily. Sweat was dripping from Tenno's brow. This had obviously not gone according to his plan, and he found himself down to his last options. The child in front of him had killed two of his allies and cut off his arm without so much as a change in expression, and he realized he was actually scared of this child he had spent a week tormenting. Trembling, he made a final plea. "Look, how about we just let this go? You've proven that you're a hell of a fighter, but we still have the advantage of numbers. How about we call this a draw and go our separate ways? His antenna quivering in anticipation, he looked the child in the eyes. Blood-red eyes bored into light yellow ones, and for a second he thought he might agree. But a small whimper came from the corner where the woman and child sat, and the moment was gone. Sensing the shift, Tenno saw a flash of blue light and quickly threw himself to the side as a gunshot rang out. Sprinting behind the wall next to him, he peeked around the corner to see his final gang member charging the child down. Without a moment's hesitation, the child turned to him with a small handgun and 3 shots rang out. His blood running cold, Tenno considered his options. Finally, he decided to pull out his trump card. His skin began to shift and warp in color, until finally he blended into the wall behind him. As he began to sneak away, he spotted the child slowly walking over to the mother and child, and a surge of anger swept through him. Dark thoughts raced through his mind as he turned and crawled, not towards freedom, but to revenge. Today has not been my day, Dustin thought to himself as he walked towards the woman. First, I get myself caught by those idiots. Sloppy, totally sloppy. Then, after beating them back, I lose track of the one that was actually important. I'm losing my touch. As he walked up to the woman, he quietly lowered his spear to the ground. Stopping about 4 feet away from her, he kneeled and quietly spoke to her. Have you been hurt in any way? He asked. Did they attack you at all? The woman shook her head, tears still flowing down her cheeks. No, thanks to you. I don't know what we would have done if it wasn't for you. I couldn't imagine anything happening to my precious daughter, she said, fresh tears flowing openly down her face. A small, freckled face framed by the same deep green hair as the young woman popped out of the woman's arms, afraid but curious. As his eyes met hers, Dustin had the strangest surge in his chest, as if something enormous had happened. Confused by this, he failed to hear the approaching footsteps until he felt a sharp pain in his stomach. A scream from the 2 girls rang out as he was lifted into the air. As his skin slowly uncamouflaged, the teen began laughing maniacally. As he lifted the boy in the air, he began to taunt him. Where's all of that sheet you were talking earlier? Not so strong are you now with a blade in your belly? What are you gonna do, bleed all over me? Throwing Dustin off his remaining claw, he stepped back to admire his handiwork. You know what? I don't even care about the girl anymore. All that matters to me is making the last few minutes of your life as horrible as I can, so I hope your pain tolerance is as big as your mouth. Laughing maniacally as he approached the fallen child, he failed to see the small figure of the girl dashing forward to grab the spear left on the ground. With all of the strength her small body could muster, she sent it sailing through the air before landing inches away from Dustin's waiting fingers. Clamping down on his spear, he threw every ounce of strength left in his body at the charging teen, and their bodies collided midway through their charge. The spear's aim rang true, and Dustin's instincts saved him as he rolled under the scythe aimed for his head. As the teen doubled over, Dustin pushed himself to his knees, but felt his strength fading from his body. As the mantis teen's body slumped over, Dustin collapsed on his back. Finally feeling the adrenaline running through him fading, the pain from his wounds were becoming too much. His new body was too fragile, and he knew he'd pushed it too far. The last thing Dustin could hear was the young girl screaming for him to hang on before he finally lost consciousness. The final thing running through his head as he passed out was the hope that he hadn't traumatized the girl too badly. A faint beeping sound was the first thing he noticed. As he slowly started to wake up, Dustin chastised himself inwardly. If I keep passing out all the time, people back home are going to stop taking me seriously. Sitting up, he looked around the small room. Machines sat all around him, and a number of wires hung from them and ran into his arms. The bed he sat in was firm and rather lumpy, but was a significant improvement from where he'd been sleeping previously. The whole room was remarkably clean, which made him suddenly aware of how filthy he was. He had the insane thought his month's worth of filth would stain the pure white walls just by being near him. A huff coming from the corner of the room startled him, and he silently cursed his body for jumping. It felt like all of the carefully honed instincts he'd developed to make him the perfect killer, were starting to fade. It scared him, and Dustin was rarely scared. He'd faced down an alpha deathclaw with nothing but a Bowie knife and hadn't felt an ounce of fear, and now he felt its cold grip around his heart. Fear had to be overcome. It was a weakness. Weakness could never be acceptable. It had been broken out of him by the years he'd spent unwillingly in the Legion. He swore he would never let anyone consider him weak again. His thoughts were broken by more shifting noises coming from the corner. Taking the opportunity to finally look, he was surprised to find the shapes of the woman and child he had saved. The woman was passed out on a sofa, her long, dark green hair frayed and messy. The child lay across a cot that had been brought into the room, and her mass of dark green curls was even worse than her mother's. A sudden curiosity about these two that he couldn't explain welled up inside him. What had they been doing in that park? Why hadn't they ran away after he'd distracted the gang members? And why did he feel such an unexplainably strong attachment to them? Enough time for questions later. Gotta figure out where the hell I am. Dustin thought. I'll be dead if I let anyone cut me open without my permission ever again. Trying to stand up, he found difficulty in moving with the wires all over his body. Ignoring the uncomfortable sensation, he slowly pulled one of the wires in his arm out, wincing lightly in pain as he did so. Waiting a second for his Phoenix implant to take over and heal the wound, he moved on, continuing to pull out the wires and tubes connected to his body. As the wires came off, the monitors behind him began to alarm and he heard footsteps running before a nurse suddenly burst into the room. The whole room was suddenly alive in a panic. As the young woman and her daughter jumped awake with a scream, Dustin's spear automatically appeared in his hand. Seeing him awake, the nurse attempted to approach him. "Young man, we need to reattach those cords to you right away. You could make your injuries worse," she said calmly, slowly moving towards him. "Where am I and what have you done to me?" Dustin responded. "You're in the hospital. You were badly hurt and are still recovering, so please we need you to get back into bed dash." "Not a chance." Dustin interrupted her. "Point me in the direction of the exit and I'll be on my way." "Young man, we can't let you go in your condition. You could still be very hurt. You must get back into bed right away." She began to get frantic, trying to block him as he leveled the spear towards her. "Get out of my way, I don't need your help," he said, growing angry. "I don't need any of this, I've survived on my own just fine." Suddenly, the young woman spoke up. "Please everyone, let's just calm down and figure this out. The nurse is just trying to help, so why don't we put that away before someone gets hurt?" Still unsure of himself, Dustin slowly began to lower his weapon. While he didn't trust any of them enough to put it away, the woman confused him, and he felt the strange connection he felt to her come back. Looking back at the nurse, he said, "I'll get back in bed for now, but the next person who tries to put any kind of tube or wire near me is getting it shoved up their a-hole, got it?" Nodding, the nurse waited as he crawled back into bed, struggling slightly due to the height. Silence filled the room before the little girl's voice piped up. "What's an a-hole, Mom?" After an awkward apology from Dustin for accidentally expanding the girl's vocabulary, introductions were finally started. "My name is Midoriya Inko, and this is my daughter Izumi." She gestured to the little girl playing with a couple of action figures. "We truly can't thank you enough for saving us, even if it was rather gruesome. I can't imagine what would have happened to us otherwise." Suddenly feeling guilty, Dustin turned his face. "It never would have happened if I'd just kept my mouth shut." "What do you mean?" "They were after me. If I'd just shut up and let them go on their way, then none of this would have happened. You would never have ran into them, I wouldn't be in this hospital, and those thugs wouldn't be." Stopping, Dustin looked out the window. The sun was beginning to set, and the lights in the city outside started to light up. It was beautiful but wasted on him. "You should just leave now, forget any of this ever happened. It would be safer for you." "And what exactly are you planning on doing, came Mrs. Midoriya's response. "Sneak out of the hospital and go back to living on the streets? Maybe go and kill a few more street gangs while you're at it." The iron in her voice surprised Dustin, and he looked at her in shock. Not waiting for his response, she continued. "Besides, we wouldn't be able to leave right away anyway. The police still want to talk to you, and right now you need someone to speak for you. You think they're going to let a child like you back onto the streets? Dustin opened his mouth to respond, but he didn't get a sound out before she began scolding him again. What kind of ridiculous talk was all of that anyway? You're a child, for goodness sake. If anyone was to blame, it was those troublemakers. They would have just hurt more people if you hadn't done anything. But to think that you were somehow responsible, and even worse, that you had to commit such horrible things. Tears welled up in her eyes. I'm sorry that this world has been so cruel to you. You deserve much better than that. Completely stunned into silence, Dustin could do nothing but sit there staring at her. His emotions were going crazy, and though he tried not to let it, a tear welled up in his left eye. Refusing to let them see, he turned away from the two of them. A few seconds passed, and Dustin was finally getting control of his emotions when he felt his bed shift. He felt smallish hands climbing over his body, but he refused to look. He could feel Izumi sitting there, eyes boring into the side of his head. Unable to withstand the staring any longer, he turned, ready to start yelling at her, but he stopped before he could say anything. She was close to his face, but that wasn't what stopped him. It was her eyes. There was no hate or fear, there was only a deep compassion in them. There was also pain, and a loss that he couldn't comprehend. Most of all, inside her eyes there was understanding. She saw him for what he was, and she didn't hate him for it. Her eyes held something in them that he had never felt, and suddenly all of the pain and suffering he had been holding in came crashing down on him. After years of pushing down his grief, everything came out, and he broke down crying. Tears flowed down the left side of his face, the right side staying dry. This only made him feel worse, as if it was just one more symbol of his lost humanity. As the tears continued and his body shook with sobs, he felt two sets of arms wrapped around him. Minutes passed, and his crying slowed, his body shaking less with each breath. Exhausted, he began to drift off to sleep, and he heard the small voice of Izumi whisper next to him. You don't have to be sad or scared anymore. Because I am here. It had been 4 days since the fight, and Dustin was itching to be able to feel sunlight again. Feeling it through the window wasn't enough in his opinion. After a long series of tests and x-rays, the doctors had determined he was in no danger, much to their surprise and confusion. After all, how many patients could survive a gaping wound in their stomach, much less walk away less than a week later? Now all he had to do though was talk with this detective. Getting through the police interview without being thrown in prison was the most important step. As Dustin sat quietly in his room, the nurse informed him that the police had arrived to question him. Mrs. Midoriya and Izumi were with him again. They'd come every afternoon to visit him and to keep him company, which confused Dustin to no end. Opening the door, a tall, clean-shaven man entered the room. We need to do a quick round of questioning for you all, if you have the time? The detective asked as he sat beside the bed. I can wait outside for a bit longer if you need some more time to prepare. Go ahead, fire away, he said. Perfect. Thank you very much. First off, I'd like to introduce myself, Detective Tsukachi at your service. He replied warmly. Now, would you be able to tell me your name? Pass. Without skipping a beat, Tsukachi continued. Well, Mr. Pass, how old are you? No idea. The detective gave him a strained look. Shrugging, Dustin replied, I'm being serious on that one. I have no clue how old I am right now. Detective Tsukachi nodded. Okay, I believe you. But please try and work with me, I'm just trying to help you out. Dustin rolled his eyes but nodded. Thank you. Now where are you from originally? Vegas. That gave the detective pause. I'm telling the truth here, I swear. No sarcasm or anything. No, I believe you, it's just, how in the world did you get here? No clue. Dustin replied, looking out the window. All I remember was a flash of blue light, then waking up in a park in the middle of the city. Do you think your family might be looking for you? The detective asked, jotting down notes as he went along. I highly doubt that. Came Dustin's dull answer. And why's that? Because they're dead. Everyone in the room froze at that. It wasn't as much the statement, but the cold, defeated tone with which he'd said it that made it so much more difficult. Tears came to Inko's eyes again, and Detective Tsukachi coughed uncomfortably. I'm sorry to hear that. I'm truly sorry for your loss. Forget it, I don't need anyone's pity. And I don't want some stranger getting into my personal business. The only reason I'm talking with you is so I can get the hell out of here. Detective Tsukachi looked down at his notes. Well, in light of this information, I just have one more question. And this is for all of you. What were the events that led up to the conflict the other day? Can you tell me in detail? I'd like to make sure I hear all of the facts again. Dustin paused. He looked at Mrs. Midoriya and Izumi, waiting to hear their answers first. It had confused him for days, and he'd never had the opportunity to ask before. Mrs. Midoriya looked at Dustin before sighing. Well, Izumi and I were just on our way home from the market. We'd spent the day out on the town doing some light shopping when Izumi heard a crashing sound coming from an alleyway. She's always been so caring, and becoming a hero has been her biggest wish, so she immediately insisted we see what happened and if anyone needed any help. She paused, collecting herself. We were suddenly surrounded by those thugs, and they pushed us to the ground. The things they said they were going to do to me, she broke off, shuddering in horror. It's okay. The detective said. You don't have to say any more. That's all I need from you, Mrs. Midoriya. Before he could say anything else, Dustin snorted. Why on earth would you want to be a hero? That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard. Izumi immediately jumped up. You take that back. Heroes are the coolest. They're here to protect us and help us. You're just a big JRK. Oh yeah? At least I'm not a grown-up playing heroes and villains, dressed up in fancy spandex. And I didn't see anyone out there protecting you in the park. Izumi bristled, drawing in her breath. Before she could begin an argument, her mother stepped in. That's enough, both of you, she said. You should be ashamed arguing like this in front of the detective. Calm down now or I'll ground the both of you. Izumi looked down at the ground in embarrassment, while Dustin looked at her in shock. He had half a mind to tell her off, but the look in her eyes quickly changed his mind and he kept his mouth shut. Now I want you both to shake hands and apologize. That got immediate protesting from both parties. That wasn't a request, she said, the iron back in her voice. Izumi, refusing to look at him, scooted over to his side. As they both reached out to shake the other's hand, they met each other's eyes. In Izumi's eyes, Dustin saw a determination he hadn't seen the other day. He suddenly had a small admiration for this young girl, and a sense of worry for what she had planned. In Dustin's eyes, Izumi saw the same pain she had seen when he'd first woken up. He hid it well, but she'd always been good at seeing behind people's walls. She didn't know much about this strange young boy, but she knew she had to do everything in her power to save him. After all, that's what All Might would have done. The moment over, both children decided they couldn't let the other win like this. At the same time, they stuck their tongues out at each other, and finally, Izumi ran back to her spot next to her mother, giggling in triumph. Dustin just shook his head, giving up on her antics. Well, now that that's settled, why don't we hear from you, young man? The detective's voice came out. Nodding, Dustin began his story. Starting from the week before, he told them about his original run-in with the gang, and Izumi giggled as she heard about how he'd scared them off the first time. Continuing on, he told them about how they'd kept coming back, forcing him to stay on the run for the whole week. Finally, he told them about the events of that fateful day. Sighing, Detective Tsukachi looked up at the ceiling. It seems you've had a rough couple of weeks, kid. By all accounts, if you were any older than a child, we'd have no choice but to arrest you. As it is, this will be difficult to explain and you could still dash. Suddenly interrupting him, Mrs. Midoriya spoke up. Surely I'm mishearing you right now? You can't seriously be putting the blame for all of this on a child? A child who saved my life, by the way. Detective Tsukachi looked around uncomfortably. Well, ma'am, unfortunately protocol dictates that he is in the blame, and unfortunately his actions did cost the lives of those boys, so he let the comment hang, not willing to say any more in fear of the look she was giving him. He sat there for a second longer, visibly sweating, and Dustin was doing everything in his power not to laugh at his situation. Finally, he broke. Except that's obviously not the case here. He acted in an obvious case of self-defense that was escalated by the gang members, and all of you were just victims of circumstance. I see that now. He stood up, sighing in exasperation. I hope you know how difficult this is going to be to explain to my superiors, ma'am. Oh, I'm sure you'll figure something out. She replied sweetly. Laughing, the detective turned to leave. Oh, one final thing, he said, turning back around. Since you don't have any guardian to take you home, we're going to need to process you into the foster system. It's unfortunate, but we can't allow children to be running around on the streets. We'll send a representative in to discuss the process with you soon. As he turned to leave, he was followed out by Mrs. Midoriya, who had a strange expression on her face. Left alone, Izumi looked over at him. So, you want to play with some of my action figures? Dustin paused for a moment, considering if it would be demeaning if he did. Finally he gave up. Why not? Which one's your coolest? Happily jumping onto the bed with him, she laid them out, immediately showing off her favorite ones. As Mrs. Midoriya walked back into the room, a smug look on her face, she found the two playing on the bed. A smile touched her as she watched the two, silently happy her daughter had finally found someone to talk to. After another long couple of days, the doctors finally had to admit that there wasn't anything else wrong with him. Unable to explain his miraculous recovery, they were forced to discharge him. Despite the detective's words, no one else had come in to talk with him about being placed into foster care. It didn't matter to him, he wouldn't be staying there long anyways. As soon as he was placed, he'd be on his way out within a few hours, and within a few days he'd be untraceable. Living on the streets was much better than being forced into some orphanage or another kind of placement after all. Packing up his things, he slipped out of the room and began to make his way out of the hospital. Obviously they didn't care enough about finding a home for them if they hadn't talked to him already, and he was happy to be free again. As he passed into the entrance room, however, he was blocked by the most terrifying presence he could have imagined. Standing before him, an angry expression on her face, was Mrs. Midoriya. Turning around to make a break for it, he barely made it 2 steps before she had him by his collar. Just where do you think you're going? She demanded. Nowhere, ma'am. Dustin said quickly. I was just going out for some fresh air. Turning him around and looking him dead in the eyes, she held him there as he began to sweat. If that's true, why did I get a call from the doctor telling me you'd ran away? That little rat, I'll get him back, I swear. Dustin thought. Assuming I survive this. There must have been some kind of mistake. I'll go back right away and find out. Mrs. Midoriya's grip did not loosen. Her stare hardened and Dustin began to pray to every god he could think of. Someone had to be listening after all. He just hoped it wouldn't be too late for their answer. Just then, a nurse came walking up, and at his side was a police officer. Mrs. Midoriya. Thanks for getting here so fast, and we're so glad you were able to catch him in time. All of the paperwork is ready and all that's left is to turn him over, so if you'll just follow me we can finish signing everything and we'll be out of your hair. Dustin followed the group, standing next to the police officer. He was more scared of what Mrs. Midoriya would do to him than anything he could do. He'd faced down death claws and hadn't blinked, and yet that woman put the fear of God into him. Sitting down next to the 3 adults, he began playing with his Pip-Boy, getting his tools and weapons ready for his escape. After a few minutes, the nurse stood up, smiled at him, and walked away. With a smirk, the police officer followed suit. Looking around confused, Dustin had no clue how to respond. I'm sure you're a bit overwhelmed right now, but don't worry one bit. Mrs. Midoriya said, crouching down next to him. You'll be staying with us from now on, and we'll make sure you're well taken care of. Dustin stood frozen on the spot. So much for my escape plans. He thought bitterly. No force on the planet would make him piece off this woman, and something told him he would never be able to escape her if he ran away. Shuffling along silently, he made his way to his new prison. As far as prisons went, he could have done much worse. As he walked into the apartment, the smell of wonderful cooking was in the air, and his mouth began to water. A few apples and some cucumbers was hardly a meal for a growing boy, and Dustin's new body was always hungry, it seemed. Looking around the apartment, he felt a sense of hominess and comfortability around the small place. Pictures and drawings were hung up everywhere, and small touches in decorations or furniture made it feel welcoming. "It's not much, but I hope you like it," Mrs. Midoriya said as she came up behind him. "I truly hope you'll start to feel at home here." Walking into the house, she put her things on the table in the kitchen. "Your room will be the one down the hallway on the right. It's a bit empty, but we'll see what we can do to make it more homey. Now, we'll have to go pick up Izumi from her last day of school soon, but before then I'd like to go over some things with you." Gesturing to the seat, Dustin had no choice but to comply. "First of all, if it wasn't obvious, you'll be staying with us from now on instead of going to a foster home. It took some effort, but after how much you helped us I felt I owed it to you." Cringing, Dustin responded, "You don't owe me anything, and I'd much rather just head out on my own. It'd be much better for us both." Nodding, she looked at him with an understanding smile. "No. Now on to the next step. We will have to go out and get you some new clothes soon, so is there anything in particular you like, or should I just get what looks best? Or maybe you'd prefer to come along?" she asked hopefully. Taken aback, Dustin stammered, his words stumbling over themselves. "I'll look, it just wouldn't." She waited for him to finish his stuttering before reaching across and holding his hands in hers. "I know this is a lot to take in, but I promise we'll take our time to let you get used to everything. I'll do my best to take care of you, and you'll never have to live in the streets again. So just please trust me? And if you wouldn't mind, could you please tell me your name so we can get to know each other a little better?" She looked at him pleadingly. A flash of anger he couldn't explain rushed through Dustin, and he ripped his hands away. He was suddenly sick of being treated like a child. He'd been one of the most powerful men in the Mojave, and now people looked at him like he was incapable of doing even the simplest tasks. With no one else to turn his anger to, he lashed out at Mrs. Midoriya. "Look, I didn't ask for any of this. I didn't want to come here, and I didn't want to be locked up in some run-down little apartment. I don't care about this place, I don't care about your rules, and I don't care about any of you. Who I am doesn't mean a diamond to any of you, and I don't give a flying F about who any of you are. So stop pretending like you're my mother and get the hell away from me." The hurt look on her face made a small part of Dustin regret what he'd said, but his anger had been building up so long with no one to point it at. He was finally at his tipping point, and he no longer cared who he hurt. Jumping down from his chair, he stormed down the hallway to his new room, slamming the door shut. The room was empty, save for a desk in the corner, and a bed with a nightstand next to it. Jumping onto the bed, he grabbed a pillow and began punching it, unable to get any of his anger out. His body felt wildly out of control, and a small part of him said he was behaving like a child. Finally, he collapsed on the bed to catch his breath. As he lay on his side, he pretended not to hear the crying coming from down the hall. Regret welled up inside him, but he steeled himself. He'd make them regret taking him in, and finally, after they were tired of him, he'd be free to do as he pleased. Slowly, he laid his head down and quietly went to sleep, his head filled with dreams of horror and regret. The following summer vacation became a trying time for the Midoriya family. While he was never outwardly rude, Dustin made it clear that he wanted no part of their little family. He remained cold and distant, ignoring their every attempt at conversation. Mrs. Midoriya was still trying, but her efforts were becoming weaker as the weeks passed, and her demeanor began to become increasingly depressed. She'd fallen into a slump, and it looked like she'd lost a lot of sleep. Dustin would have felt guilty if he wasn't trying so hard to hate them. Izumi was another matter. Ever since the first day he'd come home, she had immediately noticed that something was wrong. Rather than fight him though, she'd attempted to give him a hug, and with that one act she had began a small one-sided war in the apartment. Everywhere he went, she followed. She was always trying to talk to him, constantly asking him questions and talking about her favorite heroes. Dustin was sure he'd be sick if he heard the name All Might one more time. He began to dread waking up, and he took to spending hours locked in his room continuing his extensive repairs on ED. Finally, one late summer day, Izumi had enough. Marching right up to Dustin's room, she grabbed his hand and dragged him to the kitchen. "Mom, I'm going out to the woods and I'm bringing him with me." After he'd refused to give anyone his name, the Midoriyas and their neighbors had begun to refer to him in third person. It annoyed him, but he'd rather be annoyed than give them the satisfaction of any kind of familiarity to him. Dragging him by the wrist, Dustin was surprised by her strength. He was no weakling, but his rebellion had prevented him from eating anything that his foster mother made. I might have actually eaten better when I was out on the streets, he thought with some snark. At least it shouldn't be much longer before they're so tired of me that I can sneak off without them caring. Then I'll just find whatever I want. As if hearing his thoughts, Izumi turned and gave him a look he couldn't read as she dragged him along. Dragging him into the woods by their house, Izumi finally let go of her death grip on his wrist. About time. I thought you were trying to break my hand or something. What did you bring me out here for anyway? Trying to teach me a lesson? Well, that's fine. Why don't we just go right here and now and get it over with? Izumi just looked at him. Finally, she spoke to him in a small voice. Why are you doing this? My mom and I just want to help, so why won't you let us? Don't you know how bad you're hurting her? The pain in her voice made Dustin feel slightly ashamed. In truth, he genuinely liked the Midoriya family. The past few months he'd been taking his anger and frustration out on them because he had no one else to blame. Though he would never admit it after hurting them both so badly, he hated treating them like this. Unable to accept his guilt though, he continued to lie. Because I don't want anything to do with either of you. You can act all high and mighty all you want, but I don't believe a word you say. Izumi just looked into his eyes, and the feeling of vulnerability came back. Angrily he pushed her away. I don't want to see either of you ever again, so just leave me alone. He yelled before turning and running deeper into the woods. As he ran, he heard Izumi yell for him to stop and begin to follow him. Running into the brush, he ran for a few more minutes before ducking into a bush to hide. He heard her voice pass by him, calling out for him to come back. Finally, her voice disappeared and he sat back in relief. After a minute or two, he heard more footsteps and voices coming from the same direction. Peeking out from his hiding place, he looked for the source. He was surprised to see a group of 4 kids walking along, looking at something on the ground. Their ringleader, a boy with spiky blonde hair, said something he couldn't hear before the group started laughing and continued on. Stepping out, Dustin examined what they were looking at, but was surprised to find it was nothing but a footprint. Confused, he began to follow the group, making sure to keep hidden. When he finally caught up, the group were huddled around something on the ground. Stepping closer, Dustin was shocked to see it was Izumi. So what do you think you're doing in the woods alone, loser? You think you're so brave you can walk around here alone? How about we show you what your place here is, Deku? The blonde teen said, punching his hands together to create a small explosion. Gonna cry again? No one as pathetic as you has any business being out here. That's probably why your little boyfriend dumped you. Dustin was surprised to hear the hatred in the boy's voice, and the others in the group soon followed his lead. As he watched the other kids activated their quirks as well, one had devil wings that he spread wide open to prevent Izumi from escaping. The other extended his fingers, doing the same as the blonde advanced on her. The third with spiky black hair stood to Izumi's back and prevented her escape. As Dustin witnessed this, he couldn't help but notice the look on Izumi's face. Every time he'd looked into her face he saw determination or happiness. No matter what horrible things he'd done or said, she'd remained positive and continued to bother him. She had been a beam of annoying optimism throughout the last couple of months, and now he saw a look on her face that made him mad. Resignation. She just sat there as they approached as if any of this treatment was normal. And that set him off. Bursting forward, he sprinted up to the blonde. Before any of them could react, he grabbed his shoulder and spun him around, punching him on the side of his jaw. The blonde slumped, immediately knocked out. As the boy with wings came at him, he delivered a kick to his gut, causing him to collapse and begin puking. Hearing a crashing sound behind him, he spun around to give a death glare to the other kids only to find empty air. Looking around confused, Dustin finally spotted them, both sprinting as fast as they possibly could in the other direction. His anger was still not fading, and turning back to face Izumi, he began yelling at her. What the hell was that? I've spent the last 2 months tormenting you and your mom, and not once have I seen you give up. Every time I look at you, you've got that same determined look on your face, And now suddenly you're acting like it's the end of the world? Who are these JRKs anyway? For some ironic reason, the boy's treatment of Izumi made him furious. Turning around, the kid with wings was beginning to crawl away from him. Planting his foot on his rear end, he gave him a shove, sending him face first into a puddle of mud. As he went for him again, Izumi stepped in front of him, arms opened wide. "Stop!" She yelled, her face once again filled with that frustrating determination. "You can't keep hurting people like this." "Watch me," he said, pushing her out of his way. He grabbed the kid and pulled him to his feet. He looked at him, fear in his eyes as Dustin pulled back his fist, but before he could swing, Izumi had grabbed his arm and held onto it. The boy ducked under his arms and ran off into the woods. "You're better than this, I know you are. So please don't do this," she yelled at him, holding firmly onto his arm, preventing him from chasing after the boy. "How can you even begin to think that? You don't know the first thing about me. And you don't know what I'm capable of." He screamed back at her. "I know what I saw that day in the park. I saw how much pain you were in when you had to hurt those people. I saw how bad you were hurting in the hospital, and I see how you're hurting every day at home. You can push us all away and try and make us hate you, but I'll never stop trying to save you. Because that's what a hero would do, it's what All Might would do. Who cares what All Might thinks, and who cares what you think? I don't need your help. I don't want you to save me, and I don't need you to save me. I'm better off alone." Izumi stayed quiet, letting his arm go. She stepped in front of him, looking him in the eyes. Dustin turned away immediately. "And stop looking at me like that, I hate it so much." "Why, does it hurt to have someone actually care about you for once?" Izumi said, moving to his side, trying to look him in the face. "Are you too scared to realize that you deserve to have someone care for you? Because I don't deserve it. Why is that so hard to understand?" He roared at her. She stepped back, not expecting his reaction. He reached up to massage his temple only to find his hands violently shaking. His strength left his legs and he fell to his knees. Dustin held his still shaking hands in front of his face, staring at them as if they were covered in blood. "I have hurt so many more people than you can imagine. I have the blood of hundreds, maybe even thousands of people on my hands, and I've done nothing but cause pain and suffering to every person I've ever cared for, so how can you possibly think I could ever deserve to be loved?" The emotions came flooding out. The self-hatred and guilt he had carried around for so long had finally exploded, and it felt like his ears were ringing. He covered his ears as screams of anger and pain seemed to fill the air around him, and he fought the urge to vomit. The screams got louder, and it felt like they surrounded him, tearing at him as they called him a monster. And then Izumi was there, arms wrapped around his head. As she held him, the screams began to quiet and then, for the first time, came to a stop. "You don't have to be alone anymore," she said quietly in his ear. "We can be there for you. All I've ever known is killing, it's the only thing I can do. I'm nothing more than a murderer, Izumi. It's all I've ever been." He whispered. "You don't have to be anything anymore. All you have to be now is you. That's all that matters." She let go of him and stood back up. "It's never too late to start doing the right thing. You can leave everything behind and become whoever you want to be. All you have to do now is make a choice. So what'll it be?" She held her hand out to him, and as he stared up at her it seemed like a halo of sunlight seemed to shine around her head. A small part of him said this was crazy, but looking up at her, he was prepared to take a chance. Finally, slowly, he reached out and took her hand. "Do we really have to help this JRK out?" Dustin asked, sweat dripping off of his brow. "We can't just leave him out here." Izumi said back, sweating heavily herself. "I'm pretty sure he would have left you if you were here instead." Dustin said, looking down into the unconscious face of the blonde Jari he'd knocked out. Izumi had informed him that his name was Katsuki Bakugo, and that he had once been her closest friend. Dustin had no idea what had happened that could have caused the hatred he'd heard from him earlier, but he guessed it wasn't good. Even if he's mean to us, we have to be better than that. It's what a true hero would do. Izumi said in between another yank on Bakugo's arm. Again with this hero stuff, what's with you and heroes? Most of them are just glorified celebrities anyway. Hey, they're doing their best to protect us every day. Just because some of them stink doesn't mean all of them are bad. Izumi said angrily. Dustin looked at Izumi, a smirk on his face. Did I just hear you raise your voice? Did something finally make the little saint mad? I wasn't angry, you're just annoying. Izumi shot back with a smirk of her own. Of course I am, it's my job to be annoying. Dustin replied. I really hope you get fired soon then. Sorry, but I've got tenure. Just remember you signed up for this. I could have been long gone by now, but you convinced me to stay. Please don't make me regret it. Izumi said with one final tug. They'd been talking for the last few minutes as they dragged Bakugo's unconscious body through the forest. He'd woken up once momentarily before they'd had to drag him over a rocky patch, and in his struggles they dropped him on his head, knocking him out again. Dustin's medical training made him confident he'd be fine, which made him a little disappointed. Finally, light broke through the woods and they found themselves back on the edge of the forest. Dustin let go of Bakugo's arm and stood up. Alright, he should be fine from here on. He'll wake up in 2 or 3 minutes and I suggest we be far away from here when he does. Looking at his splayed form, Izumi nodded. That's not a bad idea. We should probably run, he can catch up pretty fast. I'd hate to lose a head start. You've been just full of great ideas today, haven't you? He said dryly. We should get going then. They were about 2 blocks away before they heard the explosions and screams. Stopping to look at Izumi, Dustin quietly chuckled before they both started running. See? I knew you could laugh. Izumi said as they'd ran. That wasn't a laugh, that was a chuckle. Now shut up and run faster. I think I hear the little twerp behind us. I'd rather not ruin my new chance at life in the first 10 minutes. Dustin said. Despite his friendlier tone, Dustin was worried. As they made their way home, he prepared himself for a difficult conversation with Inko. After making her life a living hell, he had no fantasies about how this was about to go, despite what Izumi believed. He only wished that she would allow him to occasionally visit after sending him back to Detective Tsukachi. As they walked into the apartment, Inko was seated at the kitchen table, a stern look on her face. So, I just got off the phone with Mrs. Bakugo and a few of your other friends. Care to explain what you two were up to? Izumi and Dustin looked at each other before both started talking at the same time. Izumi was just taking me on a walk to talk some sense into me dash. We were just out playing in the woods, nothing happened dash. Another look from Inko cut them both off. Izumi hung her head while Dustin looked up at Inko. I don't know what they did, but you are way out of line for attacking them like that. You have caused nothing but trouble since you got here and I am at my limit. Now I have to explain to one of my best friends why a child that I took in is assaulting her child for no reason, and you, sir, are going to dash. Before she could finish her threat, Izumi cut her off. Kaken has been attacking me, Mom. He's been doing it for years now. Inko stopped immediately. Izumi continued. He finds me on my way home from school and when I'm playing outside. No matter where I go, he follows me and hurts me. I tried to find out why, but he won't tell me. He just tells me to know my place and beats me down. Inko had tears in her eyes as she looked at her daughter. How long has this been going on? Izumi couldn't meet her eyes. Years. Why didn't you tell me? Inko said, her voice breaking. I couldn't. You and Auntie Mitsuki were always so close, and I couldn't make you two hate each other because of my problems. And everyone knows how great of a hero Kaken will be. But I can't let you blame him. He was just protecting me from them. It wasn't his fault. She said the final sentence with defiance. Looking between the two, Inko fell back in her seat. You two are going to drive me into an early grave. She sat forward. I owe you again for protecting Izumi, but your behavior is absolutely unacceptable. Don't have anything at all to say for yourself? Taking a deep breath, Dustin began. I want to start off by saying I'm sorry. Not for what happened today, but for how I've treated you. I know it's meaningless considering what I've put you through these last few months, but I'm sorry anyways. I've been angry and confused, and I've taken it out on you. It's not fair and I wish I could take it back. But I won't apologize for what I did to those boys. They attacked Izumi and were planning on hurting her, and they deserve to be punished. I'm not sorry for hurting them, but I am sorry for hurting you. I just want to ask that even if you hate me, you'll let me still see Izumi every so often. She's made me rethink my whole life and I don't want to give that up yet. Izumi looked at him sharply. How would I keep you from seeing her? Inko asked curiously. You live here. Dustin looked up, confused. I figured you wouldn't want me here anymore. After we finally got a sentence out of you that wasn't something rude, you really thought we were going to send you away? Inko asked with a small laugh. Well, yes, I was horrible to you too. Shouldn't I get some kind of punishment? Do you want to be punished? I certainly feel like I earned it. Dustin shouted, annoyed at how calm she was acting. Alright, how about this? If you finally tell us your name, we'll consider everything over with. Wipe the slate clean. Inko said with a smile. Stunned, Dustin thought for a moment. Before I do, can I ask you something? And if this is too forward, then just let me leave because I'll be too embarrassed to stay. Inko looked at him warmly. Go ahead, ask away. If you would have had a son, what would you have named him? Inko thought for a second before a large smile broke out on her face. Are you sure about this? If I'm going to let go of my past, I want to do it right. Who I was is someone I'm not proud of, and I want to be able to move on from all of that. So if you're okay with it, so am I. She paused and finally answered. Izuku. I would have named him Izuku. Looking into Izumi and Inko's faces, he finally felt something he'd been longing for so long. The love and acceptance of a family. Steeling himself, he put his hand forward. Then my name is Izuku Midoriya. It's a pleasure to finally introduce myself. It was another beautiful day in Yuzurifu. The sun was shining bright, birds were singing and people were chatting away as they went about their day. All of this was lost on one Izumi Midoriya as she pushed her way through the crowd, an excited expression on her face. You might ask yourself what could cause this excitement? Of course there was only one answer. Get away from me. A booming voice called out before a boulder crashed a few feet away from where Izumi was standing. Naturally, it was a villain attack. Izumi stood in excitement, a huge grin on her face. It had been 7 years since the fateful day she'd met her new brother, and she'd grown considerably. She was pretty, in a girl-next-door kind of way, and there was a series of diamond-shaped freckles under each of her bright green eyes. Her back-length dark green hair was impossibly curly, so much so it gave her hairstylists nightmares. She was a bit shorter than average, so she had to squeeze her way through the crowd to see the fight. The crowd around her was alive, talking about the villain attack. Sorry I'll be a bit late, another villain? Such a cool quirk. What did he do? I heard he got caught trying to steal a purse and panicked. So he's just a petty thief? How disappointing. As she watched the heroes crowd around the giant, Izumi stumbled as someone roughly shoulder-checked her. She looked up, annoyed, into the cheeky grin of her adoptive brother. Izuku had grown even more than her. While he wasn't huge, he had grown fairly tall, and he had gained a significant amount of muscle from their training. His red eyes and white hair stood out in the crowd, and his tan skin finished his unique look. As he bumped her shoulder again, he turned his attention to the fight. Anything interesting happening yet? It's been a slow week, he asked. The heroes are figuring him out right now, no one's made a move though. She answered. As if fate was tempted to make her eat her words, a shadow flew over their heads and a man lightly touched down on the rail line the giant villain stood on. The man was covered in a thick layer of wood, and as he brandished his arm, sharp twigs burst out of it. Illegally using your powers during rush hour traffic for larceny and assault? You are the very incarnation of evil. Izuku rolled his eyes at the ridiculous statement, but Izumi's eyes seemed to sparkle. It's Kamui Woods. He's a new hero on the scene, but he's already becoming super popular. This is so exciting. A man with star-like growths on his head was standing next to them. Chuckling, he pointed at Izumi. I recognize that kind of attitude anywhere. You're a fangirl, ain't ya? Blushing and ducking her head, Izumi tried to brush it off as Izuku laughed. Oh, of course not, I don't know what you're talking about. Suddenly the giant threw a huge steel beam at Kamui Woods, and he latched onto it with his arm to gain momentum before swinging away. As the beam went flying, it was caught by a shirtless man with construction equipment for gauntlets. "Get this over with quickly, Woods," he yelled. "If he keeps throwing things, someone's gonna get hurt." "It's death arms too," Izumi yelled in delight, bouncing on the ball of her feet. "This is getting better by the minute." As Kamui landed on a train next to the villain, he posed up, readying his next attack. "Prepare yourself, villain, your punishment is here." It's his signature move, Izumi yelled, mimicking his movements. "Preemptive binding dash. Lacquered chain prison," Kamui yelled, sending a wave of wooden vines at the villain. Before they touched him though, a massive object crashed into him and sent him flying. Canyon cannon. Landing on the ground next to the villain's body, the gigantic woman who knocked him out turned her head. "I'm glad you're all here for my debut," she called out. "I'm a milady, pleased to meet you all." As she introduced herself, she took a moment of extra time to push out her hips, showing off her assets. Izumi and Izuku stood in silence as a group of photographers jumped out of the crowd snapping pictures. Izuku could have sworn he'd heard one of them whispering, "Money shot, money shot, money shot." Snorting, he turned and also began to admire the view before he felt a sharp jab in his side. Rubbing his stomach, he looked down at Izumi, who was furiously writing in her notebook. "What was that for?" "You know exactly what it was for," she said, sticking her tongue out at him. "Hey, you can't blame a man for admiring," he said, laughing. "So you think she'll make it to the big leagues?" "She's certainly got the looks and flashy quirk to make it, but based on her skill level and the nature of her quirk, I think she's gonna cost the Hero Association a fortune in property damage," Izumi said, looking up every so often to get a glimpse of the new heroine. Izuku looked over her shoulder, reading what she was jotting down in her notes. "Sisiha? And here you were giving me crap for admiring. We both know your definition of admiring is very different from mine." "Who are you, my mother?" "No, I'm your sister. It's also in the job description." "I hope they fire you soon then." "I wouldn't count on it," she said, closing her notes. The man standing next to them started laughing. "You two make an interesting pair. You taking notes there? Gonna be a hero duo someday?" Izumi beamed at him. "Yes, sir. It's my greatest dream." "Well, I'm rooting for you kids. Show the world what you're made of." Izuku rolled his eyes but still smiled as he grabbed Izumi's collar. "Come on, super nerd, we've got to get to class. Can't afford to be late if you're gonna be the next number one." "Oh, shut it, you're just jealous," she said, tossing her hair with some sass. "And what reason would I have to be jealous of you? Would it be your collection of All Might stuffed animals, or your Hawk's body pillow?" he said with an evil grin. "You're just jealous that people like me wait. I don't have a Hawk's body pillow," she yelled, blushing furiously. "Don't you make me out to be some hopeless pervert like you. Please, I'm not a pervert. You're just projecting." "Oh really? Then what were you doing looking at that new heroine?" Izumi asked, hands on her hips. Izuku shrugged. "You know, you always think the worst of me. To tell you the truth, I was trying to predict how long it'd be before she gets someone hurt with all her glory hounding, and maybe I thought she was kind of hot too." Izuku had barely finished before Izumi had tossed a piece of paper from her bag at his head. "Hey, I'm just calling it like I see it, don't get mad at me for that," Izumi huffed, before her face became serious. "Still don't have much respect for heroes? Even after all these years?" Izuku snorted. "Please, Zumi, what is there to respect? The only worthwhile ones are far and few in between." "I told you not to call me that," Izumi said, scrunching her eyebrows together. "Then why don't you stop me?" "Go ahead, Zumi," he said, turning his cheek for her to hit him. "If we weren't so close to school I would. I'll just satisfy myself by giving you a beating later during training. Now answer the question," Izumi said, pushing his face away. Snorting, he continued walking. "I'll believe it when I see it. And I'll answer your question with another question. Why should I respect them? Take a look at a lady and tell me she's in it for any reason besides the fame and money. Look at how many heroes out there just care about themselves. It's all a joke, Izumi." Izumi thought for a second. There are plenty of heroes out there who just want to do good. Look at All Might and Ingenium. They're doing things for the greater good. I'll admit you got me there, but they're outliers, Zumi, they're not like most of them. He said sadly. Then why don't we do better together? She said, grabbing his arm and stopping him. You know we'd be the best hero duo they've ever seen. We could show the whole world what a true hero is supposed to be again, and we'd be the first quirkless heroes in all of Japan. Her eyes sparkled with excitement. Izuku continued walking, face slightly uncomfortable. This again? I'll give it some more thought, Zumi, but it just feels too much like my old lifestyle. It feels like I'd just be falling back into my old ways. You know it would be different, right? You'd be helping people, protecting them. You could prove to yourself and the whole world that you're more than capable of being a true hero. I know, it just feels weird. Like I said, I'll give it some thought. Izuku said, looking out over the city. He still disliked the idea, but it wasn't really a bad one. He'd had a good life here so far, and maybe it was time to pay that back, to this place and to Izumi. Before we can do any of that though, we gotta survive another year of this hellhole. The two of them stood in front of Adler Middle School, one of their least favorite places in the world. It had been made clear to both of them that quirkless people were not worth the school's time. Teachers barely paid attention to them, and any kind of bullying resulted in a blind eye. Izuku had nearly gotten into serious trouble in their first year after he'd beat up one of Izumi's bullies, but the staff had changed their minds after Izuku had shown them the video he'd recorded with his cybernetic eye. The threat of legal action had scared them off, so now they just ignored the two. That was good enough for Izumi, but Izuku had some other plans for after they graduated. He never denied he was petty after all. Finally moving to their classrooms, they gave each other looks of support before entering their separate classes. It's time for you all to start thinking about your futures, class. Izumi sat in the back of her class, idly doodling in her hero notebook as the teacher talked to them about their career paths. I would hand out these career forms. The teacher turned away from the class and tossed the stack of papers. But I know that'd be a waste of time. You're all going for the hero courses, I'm sure. As the students showed off their quirks, the teacher began trying to calm them down. All right, I know you're excited, but you know the law. No quirk usage allowed. A voice broke through the chaos of the class. Don't lump me in with these losers, teach. Everyone knows they'll never be anything. Izumi didn't have to look to know it was Bakugu who was boasting. As he continued ranting about how great a hero he'd be, Izumi sighed. She rolled her eyes as she imagined what Izuku would say if he was listening. Probably say something about him compensating for something. Izumi thought dryly. He's always been crass like that. Her thoughts were broken by the declaration from her teacher. Izumi, you're planning on trying out for UA too, right? Silence covered the room as she froze. There's no way he'd outed her in front of the whole class like that. It would be so irresponsible and stupid, and exactly what a teacher at this useless school would do. Izumi sat silently as the whole class started to laugh at her. One of the students broke off his laughter to shout at her, "What's a quirkless wannabe going to do anyway? You can't even take the exam." Actually, they changed that rule. Izumi started before her desk exploded. Jumping back out of her desk, she rubbed her eyes at the sudden brightness. Looking up, she saw Bakugu standing over her. Look, loser, you're even lower than these rejects, and you're crazy if you think you'll ever get the chance to be next to the elite. You're nothing but a worthless Deku. He leaned in closer, hands sparking. So remember your place, shitty nerd. Izumi stood back up, ignoring the sparks flying in front of her. Pushing past Bakugu, she sat back down in her seat. I'm talking to you, nerd, so stop ignoring me. He yelled, his eyes glinting dangerously. Izumi continued to ignore him, and the teacher finally ordered him to his seat. As he sat back down, he sent an ugly glare back at Izumi, who continued to ignore him. Just you wait, he thought, temper rising. I'll show you. To everyone's relief, class ended soon after that. Most of the class cleared out fairly quickly, but Izumi lagged behind putting together her notebooks. As she heard footsteps approaching her, she quickly began to shove them back into her backpack, but she was a moment too late as her newest book was snatched away. Jumping up from her chair, she faced her least favorite tormentor. "Give it back, Kaken," she said, holding out her hand. "You know what Izuku will do to you if he hears you were harassing me again, so give it back and I'll forget this happened." Bakugo looked at her for a second before slamming his hands together, exploding her notebook. Not giving him the satisfaction of a response, she settled for clenching her fists in anger. As nonchalantly as possible, Bakugo tossed the notebook out the window. They say the best heroes show signs of greatness from the very beginning. That everyone can see how amazing and skilled they are with a glance. I'm going to be the first and only person from this lousy school to make it to you, so do me a favor. He reached out and grabbed Izumi's shoulder, letting small explosions out to start burning her. "Forget about going to UA." Before he could turn away, Izumi brought her knee up, catching him squarely in the crotch. As he doubled over, his two goons grabbed him and pulled him back. "You have no say over me anymore, Kaken. I'm not afraid of you and I'll get into you, just you watch." Walking away, she grabbed the handle to the door, hands shaking. Before she could pull it open though, Bakugo's voice stopped her. "You'll never be able to make it without a quirk. Not like your brother. That prick may be skilled enough to get in without one, but you have nothing." Izumi stood quietly for a second, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. "Maybe you can find a way though. Pray for better luck in the next life and take a swan dive off the roof." Izumi slammed the door open, stomping her way down the hall. She'd sworn years ago that she'd never let them see that they'd gotten to her. She'd never let them see that they made her cry. Walking around the deserted campus, Izumi let the tears fall down her face. She'd come a long way mentally and physically with Izuku's help, but Bakugo had been right. She had nowhere near the skill level either of them had. Izuku and Bakugo were both battle prodigies. They learned new battle skills and techniques as if it were nothing and had a battle IQ that even pros dreamed of. She could strategize better than either of them given enough time, but even with Izuku's guidance she still couldn't think fast enough to use it in combat. No matter what she did, it felt like they were still leagues ahead, which only added to her frustration. As she continued walking, lost in thought, her phone buzzed. Looking down at it, she saw it was a text from Izuku. "Have to go pick up some more supplies for the garage. Meet up with you back at home." Nodding to herself, she started quietly brooding again. Her phone buzzed again, and she looked back down in annoyance. "I sent you some company by the way." As if on cue, a light humming sound could be heard from behind her, and Izumi turned around smiling. "I take it you've been sent to make sure I get home safely? Or are you just here to spy on me again? Which is it, Eddie?" The little robot sneaking up behind her jumped with a scared beep. Zipping back behind a tree, he peeked his screen up between a fork in the tree, trying to hide. Laughing, Izumi followed him. "You know I can hear you, right? It was a good attempt though, buddy. Now can you help me find my notebook?" A series of inquisitive beeps followed. "Don't worry, nothing crazy happened." Izumi lied. "It just fell out the window while I was doing some drawing." The following beep from he did not make her feel confident she'd convinced him, and she knew she'd have an earful when she got home. "Don't worry, just help me find it." The robot went flying away, and Izumi heard a trilling sound coming from further ahead. Running to the sound, she found her singed notebook in a koi pond at the base of the school. Grabbing it from the pond, she quickly shook it out and shoved it back in her bag. "See? All good, Eddie." The little robot just sat silently, and Izumi could feel his sadness. She still had no idea where Izuku had found him, and it was eerie just how human the robot felt sometimes. Putting on a fake smile, she began to walk along her usual path home. As she walked, she passed time by chatting about the new heroes she'd studied with Ed. He in turn began playing a recording of his favorite hero story, a tale of a little robot like him in hiding from an evil man called General Winters. As they talked, Izumi began to slowly feel better. They slowly switched their conversation from the heroes she'd been studying to her plans for the future. Finally, they began walking under a bridge near the residential part of town. "I'm telling you, Eddie, if we could just find a way to hook a voice box into you, it'd be so much easier for other people to understand you. You'd be the perfect sidekick for Izuku and we'd be like the Three Musketeers." Edie made a series of evasive beeps. "Oh, don't act that way. I'm sure people wouldn't be too weirded out by it. All we'd have to do is clear you as some kind of support gear and change some of your weapons to be less lethal and you're good. He let out a few more beeps, this time firmer as he shook his body back and forth. Okay, fine. I still think it'd be awesome if we could figure it out, Izumi said with a pout as they passed under the bridge. She stopped walking and looked at I. I know you're just following me because Izuku asked you to, but I really appreciate it. I've been having some doubts about everything and you've helped clear my head a bit. You're the best, Eddie. As she said this, she stepped in and wrapped her arms around the Ibot. He gave her 2 small beeps as he floated away, acting almost shy. Laughing, Izumi put her hand on his head. Don't get all soft on me, big guy. What would all of the other robots think if they heard you were acting so sappy? The robot beeped loudly, bouncing around as Izumi laughed. We'll show them all, buddy, I promise. Even if you don't join us, I'll convince Izuku, then you can be there to cheer us on. With the 2 of us, the world won't know what hit them. Haha. Izumi and Edie began moving down the tunnel, Izumi mimicking All Might's laugh as Edie sounded a small battle tune. Suddenly, she felt a cold presence rise up behind her. As she slowly turned her head, an enormous pile of sludge with 2 bulging eyes formed behind her. His body leaked slowly through a grate on the floor, and an enormous grin was plastered on his misshapen form. Wonderful, a nice little meat sack to hide myself in. You came along just in time, girlie. Now hold still and I'll make sure it's as painless as possible. The huge pile of sludge launched itself at Izumi, but she was ready for him. After years of brutal training under Izuku, she found she could easily read his movements. Jumping under his lunge, she broke away and began sprinting down the tunnel. She could hear Edie blaring his battle song before a surge of electricity arced through the tunnel. His roar of rage indicated it had hurt, but not enough to stop him. Looking back for a second, she watched the sludge villain slam his hands into the ground, cracking the concrete into huge chunks. He turned to her and picked one of the chunks up, grinning wildly. Putting on extra speed, she ran to the exit. Before she could reach the end of the tunnel, a chunk of concrete flew past her and crashed into the wall, sending bits of shrapnel raining down around her. Tripping over her feet, Izumi tumbled before crashing into a pile of rubble. Before she could get up, she felt her whole body wrapped in a tendril of sludge. One of the tendrils wrapped around her mouth, and she felt the disgusting sensation of the fluid being forced into her stomach and lungs. As he held her, the villain spoke to her. Sorry you got tangled up in this, kid. You've got a lot of spirit and I respect that, but I ain't going down now here. Don't worry, the pain will be over quick and then you won't have to worry about a thing. You're really a hero to me, kid. He finished the last statement with an ugly grin. Izumi could see Edie dancing around the sludge villain, trilling in panic. Even if his weapons had been effective against him before, using it now would risk killing her anyway. There was nothing the little robot could do to help her. As her vision began to fade, Izumi's thoughts shifted to her family. I'm sorry, Mom, I should have been more careful. I hope you know how much I love you. Spots danced before her eyes and her lungs burned for air. Izuku, thank you for making the years we were together the best I've ever had. And more importantly, thank you for believing. Suddenly the grate burst out of the ground and a huge human form jumped out of it. Fear not, citizen, because I am here, came a booming voice that echoed through the tunnel. A blast of air pressure hit the sludge villain, and Izumi felt his body fly away from her. As Izumi's vision darkened, she got a final glimpse of her savior. Is that All Might? Izumi's head was killing her as she slowly came to. Unfortunately for her, her headache was worsened by the feeling of frantic slaps on her cheek. Who could possibly be trying to wake her? Izumi's eyes shot wide open as she looked full on into the face of her number 1 hero. Noticing she was awake, he pulled back. Ha! Thought we lost you there for a second. I'm sorry for getting you caught up in this. Usually I'm not so sloppy, but this city's sewer system is not that easy to navigate. All Might boomed at her. All of Izumi's brain cells were fried. He was flying around her head worriedly, but she had bigger priorities to get through first. Not only was her favorite hero standing in front of her, but he had also personally saved her life. She needed to have this memorialized some way, but how? Her notebook. Thank you so much for saving me. Please, Art, could you dash? Turning to her last used page in her notebook, she noticed the signature sprawled across both pages. He already signed it. Thank you, sir. I'll keep it as a precious heirloom. These will be passed on to Mickeldreen and grandchildren. She yelled without pausing to breathe, and All Might gave her a quick thumbs up. As she began to calm down, All Might lifted up 2 bottles. Izumi could see the form of the sludge villain trapped inside, and she recoiled in disgust. Don't worry, citizen, I've got this villain all locked up tight. Now, for your own safety, I'll need you to please back away. Turning around, he stretched his legs and prepared to jump. Thank you for your continued support. As Izumi watched him, she suddenly couldn't shake the pain welling up inside her. She had a question for him, a question that was killing her. Her dream, her whole life was to be a hero. Surely if anyone could understand that, wouldn't it be him? As All Might crouched to finally jump, she moved. Yagi Toshinori was many things, but he was not crazy. Arguably. At least according to anyone who was not Recovery Girl. Despite this knowledge, he couldn't shake the weird feeling that he had suddenly gained 100 pounds. Looking down, he found his reason. As he stared down at his leg and the girl attached to it, he began to wonder if Recovery Girl was right. Hey, I love my fans, but this is way too close for comfort. Let go of me. He began shoving at her, trying to get her off his leg. I can't. If I let go, I'll die. The girl yelled, looking up at him with a pleading face that could have put a puppy to shame. Ah, that's a good point. Well, keep quiet while I find a place to land, and quit it with the puppy dog eyes. He yelled, trying to maintain a level of control. The girl nodded and grabbed onto his leg. As they continued to fly through the air, Toshinori noticed a small ball-shaped robot flying right behind him. Recovery Girl is definitely right. I am going crazy, he thought to himself. A flare of pain ran up through his side and he looked back down at the girl. I hope she doesn't notice anything strange. Slowly, a trickle of blood ran down the side of his mouth. Izumi sat shivering as All Might dropped her to the ground. That was a stupid thing to do, he said, walking to the side of the building. Bang on the door and someone will let you in eventually. Izumi spun around. Wait. I can't wait. All Might yelled, and in her own distress, Izumi missed the panic in his voice. Please, I need to know. The pain and frustration she had felt over and over for years was now building up all at once. She'd always felt so helpless, relying on Izuku to solve her problems for her. She loved him, but she couldn't rely on him alone. Her mind wandered back to her argument with Bakugo. He'd been right, and that hurt more than anything. Without a quirk, she would have a harder time than anyone else. People would look down on her and try and keep her from succeeding. But even if she didn't have a quirk, she had heart. She had an iron will and a drive like no other. She was smarter than almost everyone in her class, and she could figure out how a quirk worked in seconds. But she needed to know. She needed to hear it from him, from her hero, if that was enough. If she was enough. She needed to know if All Might believed in her. Is it possible for someone to be a hero without a quirk? Is it possible for someone to be a hero without a quirk? Izumi yelled out, eyes closed shut. She stood in silence, too scared to even breathe. A few seconds passed as All Might looked back at her, his expression unreadable. Quirkless, huh? For a moment, Yagi Toshinori stood there, thinking about his own past as he looked back at this girl. He had been in her shoes once, and he knew about the life of pain she had likely experienced. I need to be careful how I talk to her. She needs to be let down is oh shit. His thought was broken as he suddenly doubled over in pain, steam leaking out from his body as his form slowly collapsed. Izumi held her eyes closed, waiting for his answer. He floated beside her, dead silent as he watched the blonde hero writhe in pain. Completely oblivious to All Might's predicament, she nervously continued. All my life, everyone I've met has never taken me seriously. Everyone looks down on me and says I won't amount to anything. But I know I can do it. I train hard every day so I'll be ready, and I know I'm smart enough to make it. I want to be able to protect people, But most importantly, I want to be able to make people smile and actually feel like they're safe. I want to be the kind of hero who always has a fearless smile no matter what, just like you. Izumi finally opened her eyes, looking with an earnest smile at her hero, only to find a shriveled husk of a man standing there instead. There was a heavy silence as the three stared at each other. Who are you? Izumi finally screamed. What happened to All Might? As the skeletal man opened his mouth to speak, blood began to pour out of it. I'm All Might, he said, his words garbled by the fountain of blood. Oh my god, are you okay? Just hang on, I'll see if I can find something to help you. Izumi ran over to him, frantically rummaging in her backpack for her emergency first aid kit. There was no way it would help whatever was wrong with him, but at least she could help him get to the emergency room alive. Pulling it out of her pack, she began tearing it apart before the man grabbed her hands. Look kid, I appreciate what you're doing but that's too little too late, he said, chuckling, wincing slightly in pain. You've got spirit though, I'll give you that. Izumi sat there for a second longer before her body forced her to move. Shaking off his hands, she began pacing back and forth. She grabbed her head as she began talking, pulling at her hair. How is this possible? You can't really be All Might. All Might's a giant of a man, huge and intimidating. You look like a decoration someone puts out on Halloween. This can't be happening. Yagi would have resented that statement if he didn't begrudgingly agree with her. Sitting down, he called out to Izumi. Look kid, I'll give you an explanation but you have to calm down first. Izumi stopped pacing and moved closer, still unsure of the situation. Good, now I need you to promise that you won't repeat what I tell you to your friends or anyone else, okay? It's extremely important. Izumi snorted. What friends would I tell? She thought, but she nodded her agreement anyway. She stood silently, waiting for him to explain. Instead of talking, All Might lifted his shirt up to his chest, revealing a massive scar covering his lower stomach. Izumi gagged as she looked at the horrible wound. It's pretty nasty, isn't it? Because of this, I can only do hero work for about 3 or 4 hours a day, he told her as he lowered his shirt back down. Most of my stomach and intestines are pretty much destroyed, and my lungs aren't in great shape either. I got this from a fight about 5 years ago. Izumi looked at him in shock. 5 years ago? Was that from the fight with Toxic Chainsaw? There's no way he could have hurt you that badly. All Might's chuckled. You sure know what you're talking about. And you're right, that lowlife couldn't do this. No, this fight was one I made sure no one knew about. I had to make sure no one knew for the public safety. Izumi felt her stomach clench. After all, the world needs to believe their number one hero is unbeatable. A symbol of peace who saves everyone with a smile, right? He gave her a sad look, pain clear in his glowing eyes. I'll tell you the truth, kid, there's plenty of fear behind that smile. I smile for myself as much as for the public. It helps stave off the fear I feel every day. Izumi knew what his next words would be before he even said them. I'm sorry, but I don't think you can become a hero without a quirk. Pros. Always risking their life, and without any power you'd be putting yourself in danger. He stepped closer, putting his hand unknowingly on her burnt shoulder. As she winced, he tried smiling at her. I'm just trying to look out for you, kid. You have a good heart, and you're obviously a caring person, but you'd be putting yourself somewhere where you may die at any second. If you truly want to make a difference still, look into becoming a police officer. They get a bad rep because they clean up after the heroes, but they're good people and their work's important. He gave her shoulder a gentle squeeze of support, but Izumi just winced in pain again. Letting go, he walked to the door. It's not bad to have a dream, young lady, but it's important to be realistic too. And with a final glance back, he slipped down into the stairwell. Izumi's head swirled. After years of torment and suffering, she'd finally believed she had found someone who would understand her. Her favorite hero, the number one hero himself, should have understood, right? He of all people would understand her drive to help people. But instead he'd told her to give up. All Might himself had told her she'd never succeed. All of the pain she had suffered was nothing compared to what she felt now. She felt the sudden need to puke, and she ran over to the wall to vomit in the corner. Izumi felt her world crashing around her and her vision became blurry with tears as she repeatedly vomited until nothing was left in her stomach. She faintly heard Ida's worried beeping, but nothing seemed to matter anymore. Her whole body was shaking and she felt so incredibly weak. As All Might's words echoed through her head, another cruel voice joined in. Maybe you can find a way though. Pray for better luck in the next life and take a swan dive off the roof. As the memory of Bakugu's words hit her like a blow, she looked around the roof, sniffling. How convenient. She thought bitterly. Of all the places he could drop me off, he chose here. Maybe this is a sign. Fate. As her thoughts began to sink lower and lower, Izumi walked to the edge of the building. It would be so easy just to end the pain. She thought. Looks like Bakugu was right after all. I'll never be good enough, no matter how hard I work. Everything I've done, all the pain I've suffered, it all means nothing in the end. She put her foot on the edge of the wall and stood up. No one will care that I'm gone anyway. She thought sadly as she prepared to lean forward. Before she could fall, however, something slammed into her gut like a freight train. Flying backward off the wall, she began coughing wildly as she caught her breath. Her head ached from where she had slammed it against the ground, and stars danced across her vision. Looking up, she saw Edie hovering over her, shaking like a leaf in the wind. She suddenly felt uncharacteristically angry. What the hell do you think you're doing, Eddie? You have no right trying to stop me, you don't know a DMN thing about what I'm going through, so go away. I don't ever want to see you ever again. As the robot sat there quietly, she stood up and shouted at him again. Did you hear me, or are you just stupid? Get the hell away from here now, you useless piece of junk. The robot sat there for a second as she ranted at him. Finally, he began to play a recording to her. What are you doing over there, Eddie? Izumi stopped yelling immediately. She was surprised to hear Izuku's voice coming through the screen, and for a second she was afraid Edie had somehow called him. Come on, bud, you know you're not supposed to be here. You're going to get me in trouble if the teachers find you. Izumi was still angry, but the mental image of her overly serious brother leaning out the school window to chat with Edie in the middle of class made her happy somehow. She gave a sad chuckle, tears coming to her eyes for a reason she couldn't quite understand. Okay, fine, you're right, it is important information, but I can only talk for a second. Now you know this mission I'm putting you on is a big one, okay? I need you to make sure Izumi doesn't find out what I'm doing at the garage, so I need you to keep her distracted for a while. There was a pause. I don't know how, but I know you're smart enough to find a way. You're the best after all. There was another pause. Okay, don't get too full of yourself, just remember to keep Izumi away. If she found out I was building a suit for her hero work, she'd never let me hear the end of it. I've already got all the hero gear I need to be her partner, but I think she could use something a bit flashier, don't you? Just remember, if you tell her any of this I'll turn you into a toaster, you got it? As the recording went on, Izumi listened with tears openly flowing down her face. After all this time of acting like he wanted nothing to do with heroes, he had been building a hero suit just for her? And even more importantly, he was planning on becoming one with her? All of her anger and pain slowly began to disappear, and she could feel her heart swell with a surge of love and gratitude for her brother. He put up with her craziness and truly thought that they had a chance, and that knowledge meant everything to her. She realized that no matter what else happened, she had at least one person who believed in her. Standing up, she looked at the world around her. The city that a moment ago had lost all of its color now seemed more vibrant than ever. One person in this world believed she could do it, and that was all the support she needed. Walking over to Edie, she put her hand on his hull. Thank you. I owe you so much more than I can even imagine, so all I can say is thank you. And that I'm sorry. He gave a small beep in return and lightly brushed against her head. Before either of them could move, an explosion in the distance startled them both. What on earth was that? She said, looking out at the billowing smoke. Bakugu was said. From the day he'd gotten his quirk, he'd been told how incredible he was. Everyone who met him saw his strength and talent and told him he'd be an amazing hero. He had always known he was meant for greatness, but Izumi always managed to ruin it somehow. No matter what, she always found a way to make him doubt himself, And that set him off more than anything. He and two of his sycophants were walking along the backstreets of downtown Mizudafu, the two extras chatting away while he sat silent in his anger. Can you believe that loser back there? In what world could she ever go to? Somewhere like UA. The other teen, one of Bakugu's childhood friends, laughed as he extended his fingers out. That dumbass has always been crazy like that. She's been spouting off about heroes ever since we were kids. Even after we'd give her a beating, she just wouldn't back down. I'm surprised she hasn't given up at this point. She has to realize she's delusional, right? There's no way any hero agency in the world is gonna accept a quirkless person on their team. The first teen shook his head. Honestly, it's just sad. Like I said, man, she's crazy. Personally, I blame that weirdo that she picked up from the dumpster. If it wasn't for him, she might have turned out normal. I might have even considered asking her out on a date otherwise. She's just way too weird now. The second teen said, grinning. What about you, Bakugu? You've known her longer than I have, so what do you think? The explosive teen just stomped on a can, his hands sparking. I don't give a shit about that DMN nerd or her loser brother. I know that neither of them will ever amount to anything, and that's all I care about. They'll never be able to get anywhere near my level. Sheesh, talk about an ego. The second teen whispered. I wonder how he even walks around with how big his head is. What was that? Bakugu asked dangerously. Nothing at all. He quickly corrected himself. I was actually about to ask if we should all go down and hang out by the club or something. Maybe pick up some chicks, you know? He said with a wink. The first teen nodded vigorously, but Bakugu just shook his head in disgust. As he stomped along the back road, he roughly kicked a filthy green bottle out of his way. I already told you guys, if I'm going to get into UA, I need to have a perfectly clean record. They'll never accept me otherwise. The two other teens just shrugged as they followed him. It's not like he'd get in anyway if the school actually put any of his crap on his official record. The first teen whispered. At least it's not like anyone ever cared about how he treated a couple of quirkless losers. The second teen whispered back. I'm sure someone would have already done something if they actually gave a shit. What are we all whispering about? Came another voice from behind them. All three boys froze. Slowly, they all turned around. Standing behind them was a giant mass of a dark green-colored fluid. As the mass moved out of the shadows, they could see two evil yellow eyes and a huge lopsided grin staring down at them. The two teens backed up behind Bakugu, who remained locked in place. The sludge monster stepped forward again, tendril-like appendages spread out wide. Come on, boys, what's a few secrets among friends? I promise I won't tell a soul. His grin grew wider. And I promise none of you will either. As she slowly made her way to the chaos, Izumi took the time to think. While the message from Izuku had helped get her through a dark moment, she was still hurting. Looking down at her charred notebook, she flipped through the pages, reading through months of notes she had compiled. Finally, she came to her last page and looked at the signature sprawled across it. I don't know what I'm going to do now, she thought, wiping another tear off her face. After years of training, it all seems like a waste of time. I don't know what I'm going to tell Izuku. The thought of her brother made her feel another pang of guilt. She had been seconds away from ending her own life, and she couldn't even begin to think of how she was going to talk to her family. She began to mutter to herself. Mom would probably blame herself. It's bad enough she feels guilty about not supporting my dreams to be a hero. She couldn't handle this. And Izuku, she shuddered at the thought. He'd be terrifying. He'd murder Kaken for sure, and he'd probably find a way to kill All Might too. I can't tell them, I'll just have to make something up. As she talked, she looked up at Edie. The robot hadn't said anything since the rooftop, and it worried her. Listen, Eddie, about what happened up there. But before she could say anything, another explosion rocked the street. I'm getting really tired of these explosions interrupting my conversations today, she thought in irritation. Looking ahead of her, she saw a huge crowd on the street. Making her way over, she peeked through the crowd. I wonder what's going on. There's no way the heroes haven't put an end to this fight already. As she shifted through the crowd, she caught a glimpse of the villain and gasped. Standing in the middle of the alleyway was the same sludge villain that had attacked her earlier. This doesn't make sense, All Might caught that guy. What's he doing here now? As she thought back, she had a sudden sinking feeling in her stomach. Before All Might jumped, he must have put those bottles in his pocket. When I grabbed onto him, the bottles must have gotten knocked out. Which means, this is my fault, Izumi said with horror. As she watched, the villain swelled and began to lash out at the heroes around him. Death Arms and Kamui Woods were here as well as a half-dozen other heroes and sidekicks, but it was obvious that no one was having much success. A few of the heroes like Kamui were moving around saving the civilians still trapped by the flames, but many of the heroes were sitting on the sidelines staring helplessly. A few of the civilians in the crowd started to whisper, "What's going on? Why haven't the heroes stopped him yet?" One woman next to Izumi asked. "It looks like no one has a quirk good enough to stop him. Seems like they've met their match." A woman in front of her answered. "It looks like he's doing some serious damage and he's holding a kid hostage. They can't do anything without hurting the kid too." A tall man answered from behind her. Izumi watched as the sludge villain laughed maniacally and picked up a piece of rubble. Pulling his tentacle-like arm back, he whipped it forward and sent it hurtling towards the crowd at the other end of the street. The crowd screamed and began to run before it collided with a pair of enormous hands. Lightly pushing the crowd back, the hands pulled away to reveal the giant face of MT Lady. "I can't get in there to do anything. Anyone else having any luck?" she called out. Kamui Woods jumped from the top of the building holding a group of civilians in his arms. "I'm no good with fire, and there's plenty of people who still need rescuing. I'll leave it to you guys." As another explosion ripped apart one of the buildings, a hero dressed like a firefighter jumped into the fray. Izumi recognized him as Backdraft, and he immediately began trying to put out the massive flames. "I need some help over here too. These flames are spreading fast, and that kid's quirk is making a mess of things here." As the chaos spread, Death Arms watched, growling in frustration. "I'm not strong enough to get that kid out of there. Just hang in there, we'll try and find someone who can counter this guy as fast as we can." Izumi could feel her guilt building as she watched. If she had just left All Might alone, none of this would have happened. He would have given the villain to the police, or at the very least would have still had some time left to fight him. "I'm so sorry, please just hang in there, the heroes will do something, I promise. They'll save you, I swear." But she could see her thoughts were hollow. No hero was coming that could save them in time, and no one here could help. Every single one of them had already given up. The villain suddenly reared up, ready to attack, and she finally got a small look at the person trapped in his body. The only part of their body that was still visible was their eyes, but that was all it took for Izumi to know who it was. As she looked into the crimson eyes of the person who had made her whole life miserable, they seemed to beg her for help. As her breath caught in her chest and her feet began to move, she realized something. There was one person left who hadn't given up. Yagi had a great many regrets in his life. He regretted leaving his master behind to die. He regretted his harsh words to Night Eye when they'd gone their separate ways. He regretted not listening to Recovery Girl about taking it easy with One for All. He'd had so many bad days it was hard to count them all, and it looked like he'd have to add another one to the lineup. Today had been a colossal series of fuck-ups, and it kept getting worse by the second. He'd messed up big time when he'd lost the sludge villain in the sewers, and it had almost cost him the life of an intelligent young lady. Not only that, but that same girl had found out his second biggest secret. For all he knew, she had already gotten in touch with some news outlet and was about to destroy his reputation as the symbol of peace. The worst part was that he couldn't even blame her for doing so after he'd completely destroyed her dreams. The final look he'd seen on her face as he closed the door had filled him with an enormous amount of guilt, but he couldn't let her put herself in such danger. She deserved a better life than his, a life of pain, suffering, and loneliness. His mistakes had cost him, and he couldn't let anyone else be damaged as he had. Unfortunately, fate had other plans for him. How could I have made such a rookie mistake? Yagi thought to himself. Putting a villain into a bottle and not even securing it, what the hell was I thinking? Not only has my mistake scarred that girl, now it could cost this poor kid his life. What a sorry excuse for a hero I am. And I had the nerve to lecture that girl. Yagi stood at the back of a huge crowd surrounding the small side alleyway. The heroes were struggling to fight the sludge villain's unique quirk, and he knew the hostage was running out of time fast. He gripped the light pole he stood next to in frustration, cursing himself. I'm sorry, I can't help you. Please forgive me. I'm not a real hero. He grunted through gritted teeth as he looked down in shame. Before he could wallow in his self-hatred, he caught a sudden movement in the corner of his eye. Glancing up, his body froze as he saw a mess of familiar green hair. He felt a lump of horror rise in his throat as he watched the girl sprint headfirst into danger, ignoring the calls of the heroes she ran past. His whole body tensed up as he activated his quirk subconsciously. He wouldn't let her die for his mistake. He wouldn't let another innocent life slip by him again. Even when she was asked years after the event, Izumi could never come up with an answer that could explain what had caused her to act. As she ran, heart pounding, the only thought going through her head was to save Bakugo. The screams and shouts coming from behind her were drowned out by the pounding in her ears, and her brain went into overdrive. What can I do? What can I do? Her head was tearing through her notes, looking for an answer, before a light clicked on in her head. Grabbing her backpack, she spun quickly on the spot, mimicking what she'd seen Kamui Woods do earlier to give himself momentum to attack. Sending her pack flying through the air, the contents spilled out, hitting the sludge villain in the face. As one of her books hit him in the eye, the villain screamed out in pain. Dashing forward, she plunged her hand into the sludge around Bakugo's body. Latching onto his arm, she pulled with all of her strength. As she pulled, she heard a fit of coughing from above her. What the F, are you going here, nerd? She heard him yell through GGS and coughs. I have no idea what I'm doing, I just moved before I could think. Looking up into his eyes, she couldn't help but smile at him with tears in her eyes as she continued to pull on his arm. You just looked like you were asking for help, Kaken. The sludge villain had recovered from his injury, and he pulled his arm up. You just don't know when to quit, kid. I'll teach you to interfere. Before he could bring his arm down, a blast of energy collided with his arm, blowing it off at the elbow. The villain screamed in rage and pain as Izumi watched Ed rain another series of blasts into his body. In his moment of pain, Izumi gave a final heave and dragged Bakugo out of him with a sickening plop. As they collapsed on the ground, Izumi rolled and stood over him, covering his barely conscious form from the villain. I'm done with you both. He yelled, his body twisting and warping in anger. I'll crush you all and wipe these heroes out, I don't care what it takes. Izumi watched the tendril swing at her and prepared herself for the pain, closing her eyes. But the pain never came. As the seconds drew on, her confusion grew. Opening her eyes, she looked up. Towering over her was the bulky form of All Might, holding the sludge villain back. I really am pathetic, aren't I? He said, and while his voice was quiet, it seemed to echo across the street. I lectured you about what it takes to be a hero, yet I wasn't practicing what I preached. He pulled back his massive fist, breaking free from the villain's hold while holding onto Izumi and Bakugo with the other. The villain surged forward, his yellow eyes filled with desperation. A true hero is always giving it their all no matter what, and puts everything on the line. Izumi heard the intensity of his words and could feel the power radiating off of him. That's the true test of a hero. Detroit Smash. As his fist connected with the villain, a burst of air pressure hit Izumi. As she flew in the wind, All Might's fist clenched on her arm and she felt her strength leaving her. The wind pressure finally died down and she collapsed on the ground. Her last image before her vision blacked out was the sight of All Might standing over her, glowing blue eyes boring into hers. Izumi limped down a deserted street in the residential district. Her whole body ached, and after such an exhausting day nothing sounded better than a nice warm bath and a comic book to curl up and cry into. She could sense Ida's presence behind her, but he stayed hidden. He'd flown away after the fight, likely to prevent her from getting in trouble for having support gear, which was helpful as she had gotten enough of an earful from the heroes as it was. She'd gotten away with a warning since she technically hadn't broken any law, but now wasn't the time to be taking risks, so she let him be. It's fine by me, she thought. I need some time to think anyway. But fate was tea in her side today as she heard the sound of footsteps approaching her. What now? She thought in exasperation. Turning around, she was surprised to see Bakugo. Kaken? Panting as ran up to her, he gave her an ugly look. I didn't need your help, Deku. I didn't ask for it and I didn't want it, so don't expect me to thank you. He turned away from her and stormed off. I'd have been fine on my own, so don't you dare pity me. Well, that was certainly something. I wonder what his problem was. Izumi asked herself. Well, it doesn't matter anyway, might as well go back to the drawing board. I am here, she screamed as All Might's huge form suddenly burst out from down one of the streets in front of her. Oh my God, please don't do that again. I've had a rough enough day as it is, she yelled, clutching her chest. Yes, well, my bad, he said, rubbing the back of his head. How'd you get away from the press anyway? They were swarming you after that fiasco, Izumi asked. Escaping the press is easy, after all I'm all dash. He stopped mid-sentence as his form blew out and he spit up a stream of blood, leaving Izumi screaming again. Look, I'll be honest with you, kid. I didn't mean to hurt you earlier with what I said, I just didn't want to see you get hurt, he said, wiping off his chin. I know, and you were right anyway, it was just a silly dream, she said, looking away in shame. It was my fault that villain escaped anyway. No, it wasn't a silly dream. And it wasn't your fault he escaped. It was mine. In fact, if it wasn't for you, I never would have been able to stop him. She looked up at him. There are many stories from some of the best heroes about how they became great. There's one thing that's common amongst all of them. Whenever asked, every single one of them says that they acted before they knew what they were doing. Their bodies simply moved before they could think. Izumi could feel her eyes start to water as she sank to her knees. She hadn't been ready for the emotional toll this day had been, and she didn't dare get her hopes up again, but All Might's words were everything she'd wanted to hear. That's what happened to you today, isn't it? When every pro hero there froze up, including me, you stepped in and did what was right. Even though you put your life at risk, you acted to save the life of that boy while everyone else watched. Izumi couldn't stop the tears from flowing down her face as she gripped the ground. All Might's eyes glowed, and a flurry of pink cherry blossoms drifted through the air behind him. Young lady, you too can become a hero. And with that, Izumi let go of her restraint, letting out great heaving sobs that echoed across the street. After everything she'd been through and suffered, she finally had the answer she'd needed so badly. Her hero, the #1 hero in the world, believed in her. With his support, and with the help of her brother, she would do it. She would show the world just what she was capable of. After all, even some of the silliest dreams can become reality if you believe hard enough. No matter who we are, everyone is capable of achieving greatness if they truly try. This is the story of Izumi Midoriya and Courier 6, and how their lives changed the world. Young lady, you too can become a hero. Izumi couldn't stop herself from sobbing. Her day had been an emotionally draining one, and this statement was almost too much for her. I deem you worthy to inherit my quirk. It took a moment for his statement to click for Izumi, and she looked up in confusion. Come again? She asked. All Might burst into laughter, his voice echoing across the street. You should see your face, kid. He began wheezing as he caught his breath. All right, listen up, I'll only explain this to you once. Many people have tried to guess my quirk. Anytime someone asks, I'll crack a joke or ignore the question, but I only do it because I have to be careful who I share the information with. The name of my quirk is... He paused for dramatic effect. One for all. Izumi repeated. Yes, one for dash. You mean like the Three Musketeers? Izumi asked. All Might stared at her, completely deadpan. The what? Izumi blushed as she looked around in embarrassment. You know that old story about the French army dedicated to protecting the king? It was written way before the age of quirks. It's a classic story about dash. All Might cut her off. Sorry, kid, but you're missing the point. He recomposed himself. This quirk is one that has been passed down from generation to generation. One for All has been gathering power since the beginning of the Age of Quirks, being guided and molded by hero after hero, and now I have chosen you as its next inheritor. Izumi sat back on her heels, her head spinning. She began to mutter at an astonishing rate as All Might looked on in concern. A quirk that can be passed on? This completely goes against everything that we know in modern quirk studies, but obviously it's not like All Might would lie about this, but it really is so hard to dash. Her muttering was interrupted by a light chop on the top of her. Quit nerding out. All Might yelled at her. He took a deep breath, relaxing himself. Look, I know this is a lot to take in, but this is the truth and you'll have to accept it. You have a choice, but it's all up to you. Will you accept this power and responsibility for your own? Without even a pause, Izumi gave him a wide smile. Do I have to even say it? I accept gladly. All Might grinned and held out his hand to help her up. No hesitation, huh? I like that. You've got spirit, kid. You'll make a great hero for sure. Now we just gotta figure out a training routine for you to get you ready for UA. At the mention of training, Izumi shot up. Wait, before we do anything else, there's something important I have to do. Of course, what's the matter? There's someone I have to talk to right away. Am I allowed to tell anyone else about this? She asked, pulling her phone out. Slightly surprised by her question, he paused for a second. While I would suggest you keep it a secret from as many people as possible, it is now your secret. It's up to you who you tell. I must remind you, though, that anyone you tell will be in extreme danger. Izumi nodded, fidgeting with her phone. I know, but trust me, I'm not worried about this person. He can handle himself. As she called, her phone went to voicemail. Calling again, she still got no answer. That's weird, he's not answering. I hope he hasn't gotten himself into too much trouble while I've been gone. I don't want to have to pick him up from the police station again. What kind of trouble could one person get into? All Might asked in concern. With my brother? You really never know what he's going to get himself into next. Izumi sighed in exasperation. She grinned as an idea came to her. Although I have an idea for a bit of fun if you're up for a side trip. A few hours earlier, class was dragging on once again for Izuku. If there was one place in this world he truly hated, it was Aldra. The teachers were awful and the students couldn't care less about learning. The locker rooms always smelled like body odor and cheap deodorant spray, and the bathrooms were always disgusting, and he had seen some nasty bathrooms in the wasteland. He hated all of these herm-fueled teenagers, and he hated having to experience PBRTY for a second time. The girls who giggled every time he passed them only frustrated him further. No matter what, they always seemed to treat him differently from his sister. For all of the shit Izumi got for being quirkless, especially from the girls, none of that ever seemed to carry over to him. The same girls who talked trash to Izumi behind her back would giggle and fawn over him in the same breath. He knew it wasn't their fault, mostly, but it still frustrated him to no end. As he looked around the room, he caught eyes with a girl with bat ears and wings, and she giggled as she waved at him. Shaking his head, he looked back at the chalkboard to read the next lesson. Quirk history? Can they think about something other than quirks for once? He thought in annoyance. This brought him to what he hated the most about school, the boring classes. The subjects were too easy for him, and the teachers didn't care enough to even begin to try and challenge his intellect. Even so, he personally knew the importance of history, so he grudgingly listened to the lecture with some degree of attention before his mind began to drift off. As if the subject had triggered his memory, Izuku's mind traveled back to his own history, back to his original childhood. Most of his younger childhood was a blur, but he could still recall the stories of his people. He'd been born into a tribal society in the fringes of Colorado, a civilization far more advanced beyond the average wasteland tribal. All of their knowledge was passed down by word, and the elders of his tribe had taught them that their ancestors had been born in a vault built before the Great War that had ended humanity. According to the stories from the first generation, the dwellers of the vault had been scientists tasked with creating the greatest super soldiers in the world. They had combined the DNA of animals with human DNA in an attempt to create the ultimate life form. Through genetic manipulation, the scientists had created human beings that were capable of feats of extreme strength and endurance, and could move at speeds faster than some of the most dangerous predators on the planet. They were agile, could see as well as an eagle, and could learn just about any skill at a rate that seemed to border the impossible. Their intelligence had no match, and even the top scientists among them struggled to keep up with them. Despite all of this, the scientists' experiments were never good enough to satisfy them. The reason for this was as simple as it was disturbing. Through completely random chance, almost all of the scientists in the vault had been male, and most of them were left without any women to bond with. While some found comfort in the arms of their fellow scientists, a select few came up with another idea. They were working so hard to create a new race of people after all, why not add some more interesting features for themselves? And so the enslavement and humiliation of his ancestors began in earnest. With some slight modifications to their biology, the precursors to his people saw their gender percentage shift dramatically. Only 1 in 10 children were born male, and all of these new children were born with pure white hair and gem-colored eyes. Their appearances became beautiful, bordering on being physically perfect. They were a new breed of humans, the next step in evolution, but they were still nothing more than slaves. His people had been created for the sole purpose of protecting and serving these men, and they were seen as nothing more than tools and objects to be used. But as the scientists would eventually find out, all things must come to an end, and even a SLV could become a king if given the chance. When he'd first heard the stories, Izuku hadn't believed any of them. He'd been a child, and the idea that his whole tribe had been nothing more than some crackpot's science experiment was laughable at best and terrifying at worst. After getting a bit older and experiencing the other vaults surrounding the area of New Vegas, however, the stories suddenly didn't sound so far-fetched. As he reminisced about his old life, Izuku was broken out of his thoughts by the ringing of the school bell. He shook his head to clear out his mind and began to put his books away. Just as good, he thought. There's no use hanging on to a dusty old story anyway. It's better to just leave the past alone. As he packed his bag though, he couldn't get rid of the feeling of sadness that followed him whenever he thought about his old tribe. It had been years since he had lost them, but the memories still hit him like it was yesterday. An old rival had told him once that so long as he lived, the memory and history of his tribe carried on. He just wished the memories didn't hurt so much. Grabbing his pack, he began to make his way out of the classroom. His expression must have been too serious, however, because he soon felt someone tap on his shoulder. He turned to face them and immediately regretted the fact he hadn't just ran off instead. Behind him was the all-too-familiar face of the Batgirl, Iona Fukumori. A small group of her friends stood to the side, whispering. She walked up close to him before cupping her hand to his cheek. "That's a pretty intense look on your face there, Izuku. Got anything serious on your mind?" Izuku's blood boiled at her touch, but he kept himself calm. "Nothing you should worry yourself over. I'm really sorry, but I don't have time for any games, Fukumori. Now if you don't mind, I've got places to be." As he stepped around her, she blocked his path. "I do mind actually." She checked her polished nails as he ground his teeth. "You haven't RSVP'd for my birthday party and I was really hoping to see you there." She looked up and flashed her brilliant smile at him. With her long, straight dark black hair and curvy form, she was incredibly attractive, but Izuku knew firsthand from his sister just how evil she truly was. Iona Fukumori was one of the most beautiful and one of the meanest girls in the school, and she took extra pleasure in abusing Izumi whenever she could. She was a bully as well as the textbook definition of an entitled, spoiled brat, and her father was a rich and powerful businessman with contacts in high places. Used to getting everything she wanted, she had taken a real shine to him since his first day of school at Aldera, and it had become Izuku's personal mission to avoid her at all costs. That, of course, only made her want him more. With her popularity and money, she could make Izuku's life very difficult if he acted out too much, so he needed to be patient until they had graduated Aldera. Patience was not something Izuku was good at, but he had to be careful for the sake of his family. "I've got a family event that I can't skip on that day. I hope you have a great birthday though." Izuku tried to step around her again but was blocked. "I'm sure it wouldn't be a problem if we changed it then," she said, sliding closer to him. "I wouldn't want my star guest to be absent. I've got a family event that day too." She pouted. I haven't even told you the date yet. I'm going to be busy that whole week actually. You know how it is sometimes. Izuku said, hoping she'd take the hint. He turned to walk away but was blocked by the horde of girls. I'm sure I could postpone it for a week for your family event if it's that important, she said as she put air quotes around the family event. Her tone betrayed her irritation, and Izuku got a small amount of satisfaction from that. Did I say week? I meant month, Izuku said as he pushed through the crowd. Chittering in anger, Fukumori finally walked up to him and grabbed his collar. Look, I'm tired of playing this hard-to-get game. It was cute at first, but it's getting really annoying. You should be grateful I'm even giving a pathetic quirkless JRK like you a chance, so get over yourself and just go out with me. Dating me is the only way anyone in your pathetic excuse for a family will ever succeed anyway. And that was the final straw. Throwing all caution to the wind, Izuku leaned down until his face was inches from hers. His anger could only be described as a cold fury, and Fukumori immediately turned white. Eyes literally glowing a bright red, Izuku stared her down. I'm tired of playing nice, so let me make this as clear to you as I can. I don't like you. I'm not playing hard to get and I'm not acting all cute for you. I think you're the most unlikable beach I've ever met in my life. You're a spoiled snob who acts like she's better than everyone else, and you seem to think you're entitled to whatever you want because you have daddy's money. But for your information, there's one thing you will never have, no matter how much you beg or scream. He stopped and looked her up and down. You'll never be good enough for me. Unlike you, I have standards for myself. Do what you want, I'm not scared of you or your dad. And with that he walked away, leaving her and her crew in a state of shock. As he left her behind, she began to scream. Izuku could still hear her screams of rage coming from outside the school building as he walked away. I haven't felt that kind of pride in my work in a long time. Tim, did that feel good? He thought with a small smile. I'm definitely gonna be regretting that soon though. Shaking his head, he began to make his way through town, headed to the garage where he had been working on Izumi's hero gear in secret. While he felt guilty about leaving her alone, he knew EDE would keep her safe on her way home, and he needed the extra time to work out some KNKS he'd run into with her armor. He also needed to take a good look over his own gear and start planning for UA. Izumi had made a good point, and it was finally time to prove to the world and to himself that he could take up the mantle of hero. It felt weird considering his past, but it was time for him to accept how far he'd come. He spent the better part of an hour walking from his school to his garage a few blocks from Takoba Beach. Despite being spacious, well-insulated beachfront storage, the property had been extremely cheap. Izuku blamed that on the fact that the beach itself was covered in enormous piles of garbage, but it suited him just fine. It made it easy to get extra scrap metal and parts he could experiment with. Building and repairing things were some of the few things his people weren't able to inherently learn, and he took great joy in the work. He hummed as he walked, excited to throw himself into an evening of tinkering. Unfortunately, that just wasn't meant to be. A few blocks away from his garage, he was stopped by a group of bulky men wearing black suits and sunglasses. Are you Izuku Midoriya? Asked what Izuku could only assume was the leader of the group. After all, he was the biggest and stupidest looking of them all. Depends on who's asking, he said as the other four surrounded him. While he'd expected some thugs to show up eventually, the speed at which they'd found him was honestly impressive. You know, whatever they pay you guys, it's not enough. You guys work way faster than I expected. Ignoring him, the thugs closed in around him. We've got orders to teach you a lesson, punk, the leader said, leaning down and looking him in the eyes. I hear someone's been running their mouths around here. Izuku shrugged, spreading his hands out. What can I say? It's a special talent of mine. Maybe I do have a quirk after all. Oh, we've got a funny guy here? Well, we'll see if you still think you're funny when we mess up that pretty face of yours, he said as he cracked his knuckles. Sorry, buddy, I'm flattered, but my bat doesn't swing that way. One of the thugs snickered, and the leader grabbed Izuku by the collar and hoisted him up. Listen, you better start taking this seriously or I'll make you regret it, he growled angrily. Izuku plucked the glasses off of his face and put them on himself. I'd say I would consider it, but then I'd be lying. Truth be told, I'll never give you the satisfaction. And with that, he jabbed his fingers into the man's eyes. The fight, if it could even be called a fight, was over in seconds. With their leader on his knees clutching his eyes, 2 of the other 4 jumped at him. Without breaking his stride, Izuku dodged in between their punches before delivering 2 swift blows to their lower stomachs, right to their livers. Both went down screaming in pain as he lightly stepped over them. As he pulled his fists into a defensive stance, one of the thugs came at him with a sloppy overhead swing. Ducking under it, he jabbed the man in the face twice with his left fist before uppercutting him directly under his jaw with his right, sending the man sprawling. Turning to the last thug, he stretched his arm out and put his hand out flat, slowly curling his fingers towards him. Ignoring the taunt, the final thug came at him slower, keeping a defensive stance similar to Izuku's. Izuku could feel his blood pumping, and he started psyching himself up for his first real fight in ages. Before either of them could strike, however, they were suddenly surrounded by the sirens of police cars. Izuku put his fists down as a group of police surrounded them. Recognizing one of the faces, he waved. "Hey, Officer Sansa. How's everything going?" The cat-headed officer just rolled his eyes, ignoring him as he cuffed one of the thugs. "Come on, Sansa, what's up with the cold shoulder? You know you guys love me. With a winning attitude like yours, how could we not?" Came the dry voice of Detective Tsukachi, who was stepping out of the lead cruiser. "I mean, you guys keep coming around, so it's gotta be for a reason, right?" Izuku said as 2 of the officers approached him. Before he could say anything else, 2 of the officers grabbed him by the arms and cuffed him as well. Looking towards Detective Tsukachi, he held up the cuffs in annoyance. "Detective, is this really necessary? These guys actually came at me first, you know." The detective just smiled at him. "Oh, I know, but everyone just missed you so much," he said sarcastically. He looked at the 5 thugs who were being shoved into police cruisers. "These guys showed up about 10 or 15 minutes ago, and we figured you had something to do with it. We were already waiting in the area for you, so I figured we'd wait a bit longer and see what happened. Who'd you piss off this time? I may have called one of the Fukumari daughters out for being a rich snob," Izuku said as he sat down on the ground looking up at the officers around him. The 2 officers holding him by the arms gave him a dirty look and grunted in annoyance as they dragged him into the car. Tsukachi groaned as he slipped himself back into the front of the car. "You know you're going to get yourself killed one of these days, right? You're eventually going to mouth off to the wrong person and end up in a ditch." Izuku just looked out the window. "I'm not afraid of death, detective. He can have me whenever he wants, but so far he's been too scared to try and take me. Now, what's the situation? And can you get these cuffs off of me?" Sighing, Tsukachi reached back with the key and undid the locks. "We both know you could have had them undone before we got in the car, so why do you have to play these games?" "I could ask you the same question, detective." Izuku rubbed his wrists, grinning. "Sorry, but someone has to keep you on your feet." Izuku had been working with Detective Tsukachi for years following their initial introduction at the hospital. At first, he had only came in to check and make sure he was doing all right with the Midoriya family, but that had changed fairly rapidly. After the detective accidentally shared the details of a difficult case with him, Izuku had shown a talent for detective work, and Tsukachi had signed him on as a temporary advisor. He'd helped them with plenty of cases over the years, and his casual relationship with the police had earned him a friendly rivalry with most of the officers under the detective's authority. Handing him back a file, Tsukachi looked at Izuku with a grim face. "That bad?" Izuku asked, his smile slipping off of his face. "It's more gruesome than we've seen in a very long time," Tsukachi said in a quiet voice. Immediately changing his attitude, Izuku read through the case. What he found churned his stomach. The entire population of a small mountain town had been found dead. Many of them had been brutally murdered, heads hacked off and mounted on spears. A number of people looked like they had been set on fire, and their bodies were twisted in the traces of horrific agony. Fully half of the dead, however, had been killed in a way that Izuku was all too familiar with. They had been crucified. Nailed to a cross and left to suffocate, many of these people had probably taken days to die, and Izuku was sickened at the thought. "Who did this?" Izuku asked in a quiet voice. "We were hoping you could help us find out." Tsukachi responded. He held up another photo. This was the only other piece of evidence we could find on the site. Everything else was either burned up or destroyed. Izuku reached out and took the picture, and his eyes widened. He could feel the scars on his back and chest begin to itch in pain as his memories surfaced once again. In the dead center of the photo was a crimson flag. There was nothing on the flag except a single symbol, but Izuku recognized it in an instant. After all, it was hard to forget when he had that same bull symbol branded onto his chest. After agreeing to look into the case, Izuku said his goodbyes to Tsukachi and a few of the other police officers. The town that had been attacked was deep in the mountainous area of Japan, so he had a couple of days' time to try and poke around without interruption before everything went public. There were plenty of theories as to who could have been responsible for the attack, but none of them were good as far as Izuku was concerned. Pushing his worries to the side, Izuku punched in the code to his garage and stepped inside. As the lights flickered on, he looked around the room. The garage was fairly large and was filled with tool racks and workbenches for all of his various projects. It was his home away from home, and one of the only places he felt truly comfortable. However, something felt off today. His instincts told him someone was there with him, someone unfamiliar. Moving quietly through the room, he pulled out his favorite revolver, Lucky. The beautifully engraved pistol had served him well for years, and he loaded it quietly with a special non-lethal round he had designed. Rounding the corner, he held it in front of him as he scanned the area. Next to one of his armor workbenches, he saw a flicker of movement. Walking slowly, careful to not make any noise, he got closer. Before he could see what it was, something sprinted past him at a speed he couldn't even react to. Spinning around, he looked at the empty room. "Alright, whoever is there, come out and I promise I won't hurt you," he called out. Silence answered him. Pulling back the hammer on his revolver, he moved towards the center of the room. "Trust me, you won't like what happens if I shoot you with this. It won't kill you, but it sure as hell will make you wish I had." Before he could react, the lights went out. Turning on his Pip-Boy light, he held his arm out. The dark room reminded him of the ghoul-filled halls at RepCon, and he suddenly felt like he was being hunted. Taking slow steps backward, he tried to activate his cybernetic eye, keeping his guard up. As he slowly backed up, however, his foot connected with something behind him and he froze. In an instant, he activated one of his GRX implants. Turning, his sped-up senses allowed him to see what had been following him in slow motion, taking in every detail. The figure before him was gaunt and horrifying. It was nothing but skin and bones, and blood trickled down its chin. A torn-up outfit covered its form, and the smell of death hung around it as it reached for him, mouth wide open. Izuku tripped backwards with a crash, startled by its sudden appearance. The creature moved closer, groaning, and without hesitation he fired 2 bullets into it, expecting its cries of pain. What he got instead was a choking wheeze. The lights suddenly flickered back on. To his bewilderment, the creature in front of him bent over to catch its breath, pulling a heavy vest off of its chest. Izuku's confusion only grew until he heard a familiar peal of laughter ring out. Groaning, he laid back down. As he laid on the ground in embarrassment, a grinning face ringed by a mass of green blocked out the overhead lights. "Gotcha that time, didn't I? Izumi, I'm going to put a dead rat in your pillow tonight," he said in annoyance. Her face twisted in disgust. "You wouldn't dare." "Actually, you're right," he said. "I'm gonna put a live one in there while you're sleeping. I think I saw one out by the dumpster at home the other night." Kicking him lightly in the shoulder, she held her hand out to him. Taking it, he pulled himself up. "Now what exactly are you doing here, and who's the skeleton you picked up along the way? You know I don't like strangers in my workspace," he asked, jerking his head in the direction of the man as he massaged his chest. "I'll tell you the whole story in a minute, but let's just take a minute to slow down here, okay? A bunch of really important stuff happened today, and I figured this was the best place to talk about it. I mean, you've done a good job of soundproofing this place, and it's in a quiet part of town, so it should be perfect." Izuku stared at her for a moment. I really don't like the implications of what you're saying. You're making me sound like some kind of serial killer. Pushing his shoulder, she heaved herself up onto one of the workbenches and sat down. Nah, it'd be too obvious. Quiet loner boy who spends more times around machines than people? The clichés write themselves. Oh haha, go F yourself Zumi, he said. A third voice joined them. You really shouldn't be using that kind of language at your age. And are we going to just ignore the fact that he just shot me? Izuku turned back to the tall blonde man. He looked him up and down, squinting. I can't believe I almost forgot about Skeletor here. For your information, you broke into my garage. I was acting in self-defense. And lucky for you, I made sure I was using non-lethal rounds, so no, I don't think we'll be discussing that little fact. He stopped suddenly, looking into the man's face as he felt a flicker of recognition. But you look very familiar. Have we met before by any chance? The man looked over to Izumi, who nodded with a small smile. Shrugging, he stepped back. In a second he inflated himself, standing up to his full height. I'm sure you'd recognize me better like this, right? All Might said in his booming voice. Izuku looked at Izumi, and then back at All Might, repeating the motion twice. Finally, he lifted up his Pip-Boy and a bright blue light appeared in his hand. Lifting a whiskey bottle up to his lips, he shook his head. I'm too sober for this sheet.